Thanks for visiting Timeless Audiobooks. Please remember to like, comment, share and subscribe for our latest audiobook uploads.
Section 1 of Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by T.E. McHenry. Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales by Charles B. Cory. Montezuma's Castle. "No," said the curiosity dealer. "That mummy is not for sale. I had too big a job to get it." "Tell me about it," I asked. The curiosity dealer carefully closed and locked the case, and then meditatively rolled a cigarette. "Well, it was this way. You see, I was out after snakes and other natural history specimens. I had a special order from a chap in New York for 300 snakes. He wanted some big rattlers. I think I sent him some that pleased him. Anyhow, he paid for them all right. I had a customer who wanted a rattlesnake with a very big rattle, and I fixed up a snake for him on this trip and sent it to him afterwards. It had 118 rattles. I glued a lot of rattles together, and by taking off the buttons it was pretty hard to see where they were joined. This rattle was more than a foot long. There was another eastern chap wanting an ibex, which he said was found up in these mountains. It had light-colored horns curved over at the tips like a chamois, and striped legs and eyes that stuck out like an antelope. He had heard about the ibex and wanted a pair. I told him I'd often killed them, but they were hard to get. "What is an ibex?" I asked. "I'll be hanged if I know," answered the collector. "But there are fellows in these mountains who say that there really are such animals. And if he wanted to have an ibex, and had to have an ibex, I might as well get him an ibex as anybody else, even if I had to make one. But to get back to my story, I had a big outfit on this trip, and I expected to get a lot of curios one way or another. What with the snakes and the animals of various kinds, besides all the things that I might pick up in the way of baskets and Indian relics, which might prove saleable. My outfit consisted of 2 wagons, 5 horses, and I had a Mexican along to look after the teams and do the cooking. After being out some 2 weeks, we found ourselves near what is called Montezuma's Castle, up by the Verde. There are a lot of caves scattered about up there, supposed to have been made by cave dwellers, and many of them had never been touched or examined. I had an offer of good money for a mummy, and I had tried making them out of the bodies of Indian children, but I could never get them to look real. The bones are not crumbly enough, and the rags which the real mummies are done up in are pretty difficult to imitate. I was mighty anxious to explore the big caves, so off we went to the place. And I tell you, the old ruin they call Montezuma's Castle is a dandy, and don't you forget it. The castle is built on a ledge high up on the side of a mountain which hangs over at the top. The only way to get up is by ladders or ropes, and it's mighty hard to get there even then. Right near there, on the face of the high cliff, there are a lot of fine old cliff dwellings, and some of them are more than 100 feet from the base. These cliffs are straight up and down, and sometimes nearly smooth, but often with narrow broken ledges here and there and on the face of the wall. One particular cave, which seemed to be a rather large one, was about 50 feet up, and immediate below it were 2 or 3 small ledges, which after I had looked the place over, seemed to me sufficiently wide to hold a ladder. And I came to the conclusion that if I wished to explore one of these caves, I'd better try this one in question. In my outfit I had 2 large tents, 9 by 14, and the poles of these tents, it seemed to me, would answer very well for ladders, if I connected them by pieces of rope. It was not necessary to make the steps very near together, and by cutting notches in the poles and tying pieces of rope across, I succeeded in making 2 very good ladders, one 14 feet long with the 2 top poles, one from each tent, and 2 small ladders, each about 7 feet. I made these last from the 4 upright tent poles, there being 2 in each tent, as you know. The foot of the cliff was rough, and the first 15 feet or so we could climb easily to a broad ledge. Then there came a space between 9 and 10 feet in height, which was smooth and perpendicular as a wall. Here my first ladder was put up. 2 small ledges above this, some 3 feet apart, and a wider ledge 4 feet higher, allowed me to climb up without the use of ladders to another ledge. From here I ran another small ladder up to a ledge which was between 2 and 3 feet wide. From this ledge to the entrance of the cave was about 12 feet, and my 14-foot ladder answered finally. But the difficulty was, it had to stand so straight that it was rather ticklish business going up. One could not help the feeling that a slip or a little backward jerk would topple it over to the valley below. And as from the ledge where it stood to the bottom was some 40 feet, a tumble onto the rocks would prove most unpleasant. However, my Mexican, Antonio, held the ladder, and by very careful work I succeeded in reaching the mouth of the cave and crawling in. I had no sooner entered than I felt pretty sure it had never previously been visited by anyone since the original inhabitants left it. The first thing I did was to take a stout piece of twine from my pocket and fasten the end of the ladder to a piece of rock. Then I felt easier. There are numerous bits of broken pottery scattered about, and one nearly perfect specimen. Besides these, there was a very interesting bit of stone carving. These things I gathered together and placed in a heap near the entrance. I then went back, and taking a small hatchet which I had brought with me, commenced to dig in the floor, and pretty soon found this little child mummy. By the time I had taken it out, I was pretty thirsty and hot. As you may suppose, I was careful and did not hurry matters, and the cave was like an oven. Wrapping the little mummy carefully in a big handkerchief which I had tied around my neck, I untied the twine from the ladder and lowered the bundle slowly down to Antonio, my Mexican, who was standing at the foot of the top of the ladder. It reached him safely, but while he was untying it, I carelessly dropped the end of the string. I went back, however, and gathered up the other relics, intending to take some of them down with me and then come back for the rest if I could not manage them all the first time. While I was looking them over, I heard a crash and the sound of tumbling stones, and looking out I saw that the ladder had fallen, and commenced to curse Antonio for his carelessness. But imagine my horror when I saw him throw down the bottom of the ladder and then run as fast as he could towards the camp. My first and only thought was to pay Antonio for his treachery. It was evidently his intention to leave me safely housed in a place from which I could never escape alive, and to start off the proud owner of the 2 wagons, 5 horses, and various valuables which he believed my boxes to contain. My revolver was still in my belt, and hastily pulling it, I commenced shooting at the running figure, now some 60 or 70 yards distant. The first bullet knocked up a cloud of dust about 3 feet to his right and a little ahead. The second was still worse, but the third he turned sideways, staggered on several paces, and fell among some loose rocks in a way that must have been unpleasant. He tried to get up again, but now I had his range pretty well, and I hit him again with the 6th shot. After that he lay pretty quiet, although I thought I saw him move his arm once or twice. I reloaded, having plenty of cartridges in my belt, and began shooting at him again. This time I hit him 3 times out of 6 shots, and as he had not moved for some minutes, I concluded he was dead. Then I began to think over how I was going to get down. I was very thirsty, and it was tantalizing to see the water down in the valley sparkling in the sunlight. It looked very clear and refreshing. I thought and thought, and the more I thought, the more hopeless it seemed for me to plan a way to get down alive. There was one ladder standing, the second one, but there was a space of some 30 feet before I could reach it. I had absolutely nothing, not even a string to aid me in getting down. There was no use hoping for help from anyone, for the place was rarely visited, and it might be weeks before any person would discover that I was there. I was getting more thirsty all the time, and at last I hated to go to the mouth of the cave, hot as it was inside, because the sight of the water nearly drove me mad. I amused myself by occasionally taking a shot at Antonio. I had his range down pretty fine now, and rarely missed him. It was getting late, and the sun had long since sunk out of sight. Above the mountains there was one tall peak which I could see up the canyon. It stood out in the sunlight, bright and shining, even after the canyon had become quite dark. As the sun sank lower and lower and the darkness crept gradually up until only the very top was left a shining point, for a few minutes it shone a fiery red, and then the light was gone, like a huge torch which flickers and goes out. Then the night noises commenced, the incessant maddening croaking of the frogs, and now and then an owl. "Did you ever hear the frogs in Arizona?" I responded in the affirmative. "Well then, you know something about what they sound like, and know they can give eastern frogs cards and spades and beat them easy. But you don't know what they sound like when you're really thirsty." "Probably not," I answered. "Well," continued the curiosity dealer, "I knew nothing could be done until morning, so I lay down and tried to sleep. I was very nervous and could not help fearing that in the night I might walk in my sleep or roll to the mouth of the cave and tumble out. I do not think I really slept at all, but lay in a half-dazed condition until it was light enough for me to see things in the canyon below. Strange to say, I was not hungry, although I had eaten nothing since the previous morning. My whole thoughts were concentrated on the one desire, something to drink. I thought and pondered, trying to think of some possible way to get down. At one time I seriously thought about jumping to the ledge below, but I knew that it would be impossible for me to stay on it even if my legs were not broken by the fall, and that to jump meant to practically commit suicide. At last a thought occurred to me that I might possibly make a rope out of my clothes. I had a large pocket knife and a hatchet, and no sooner had the thought suggested itself than I commenced to undress. My canvas coat, shirt, and trousers, and some thin underclothes constituted my entire wardrobe, and by carefully cutting them into strips wide enough to bear my weight, and yet narrow enough to give sufficient length, I succeeded in making a kind of rope with which I hoped I could succeed in reaching the second ladder without broken bones. I could not work steadily. It was impossible for me to avoid getting up now and then, walking about the cave. I suffered so with the heat and thirst that the hope of escape alone kept me from going mad. At last the rope was done and tied together with various knots. It had a creepy sort of stretchy feeling when I pulled on it, but I had no alternative but to trust to it. It was that or nothing, and nothing meant death from thirst in a very short time. I succeeded in fixing the hatchet firmly into and across the cleft in the rock, where it was split, and it gave me something to tie the rope to which I was satisfied would hold my weight. I tied the end of the rope to the hatchet handle and threw the other end down, and was mighty glad to see that it had reached within 4 or 5 feet of the middle ledge. I was stark naked excepting my shoes, and I tell you it was no easy task letting oneself down over the sharp edges of the rock. Every moment I expected to see one of the knots give way, and I shall never forget the feeling which came over me as I swung myself clear of the ledge and hung swaying on that improvised rope, which seemed to stretch and grow thin in a way which sent cold shivers running up and down my spine. It had seemed a year before I had reached the ledge. I went down pretty slow, sparing the rope as much as I could by supporting part of my weight by digging my toes into every little crack and crevice I could find. But I got there at last, and when I did, I sat down on the ledge and cried like a baby. Well, that's the story. Of course, I got down the rest of the way all right, or I wouldn't be here. But I don't know as I would have done it if Antonio had pulled down the second ladder instead of the bottom one. He was evidently in too much of a hurry to do the job right. After reaching the second ladder, it was no kind of trick to slide down and to use it over again. The first thing I did when I got down was to run as fast as I could to the river and drink as much water as I dared. Then I lay down in the water and enjoyed it. Talk about your paradise cocktails. They are not to be compared with the Verde River water which I tasted that day. Antonio? Oh yes, he is there yet, I believe, although I've never been back since to see, and I hope I never will. My first experience among the cliff dwellers was all sufficient. The end. Montezuma's Castle. Section 2 of Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by T.E. McHenry. Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales by Charles B. Cory. The Amateur Championship. A committee from the Phoenix Athletic Club and one from the Prescott Club had met, and after considerable discussion had arranged a match to decide the Amateur Championship of Arizona. As the Phoenix and Prescott Clubs were far and away the foremost athletic organizations in the territory, the contest was looked forward to with great interest, especially as an intense rivalry existed between the two cities. "Let the contest be fair and square on both sides," said Smith, the chairman of the Phoenix committee. "Let each club send its best man, who is strictly an amateur, of course, and a member of the club in good standing, and let the best man win." "Them's my sentiments exactly," responded Johnson, the chairman of the Prescott committee. "Fair play and honors to the best man, say I. I did think of sending a young fellow I know in our club who took some sparring lessons in Frisco last year, and is quite clever. He's a gunsmith by profession, but the trouble is he's been teaching the boys during his spare time when he can get away from the shop, and that makes him a professional, doesn't it?" "It does," said Smith. and I am glad to find you are as particular as I am in such matters. Let me tell you, it is a pleasure to meet a man like yourself, who tries to be fair and square and take no advantage of anybody. Let's take something." During the next few days there were anxious meetings of the committees in charge of the arrangements. A certain man well up in sporting matters went to Frisco as a committee of one representing the Prescott Club to hunt for talent. At the same time, a brother of the chairman of the Phoenix Committee, who kept a barroom in Chicago, received a letter which caused considerable discussion between him and his partner and several interviews with certain short-haired, thick-set individual who frequented his place. "What I want," said the letter, "is the best man you can get, someone who is a sure winner and can punch the stuffing out of this amateur duck from Prescott. Don't make a mistake, and don't spare money. Get a star, as the boys will bet all they have on him, and we do not want to take any chances." The following week the chairman of the committee of the Phoenix organization received a letter from his brother in Chicago, which informed him that for $200 in expenses they had secured the services of a well-known professional, but one who had never been West, and who they were sure could lick anything which could be produced, professional or amateur, on the Pacific coast. He had commenced training, and they could rest easy and bet as much money as they wanted to. Meanwhile, the Prescott Club's representative made a rich find in San Francisco, in the shape of an Australian professional who had just landed and was therefore not likely to be recognized. He had a record of numerous victories in his own country, and cheerfully undertook, for the sum of $75, to knock the bloomin' head off any bloomin' duffer, anywhere his own weight, that might be brought up against him. Things went along merrily. Letters were exchanged between the chairmen of the two committees, reporting as to the progress of their representatives. "Our young man," wrote the Prescott leader, "is doing very well, and I hope great things from him. Naturally, we want him to win, and have secured the best man of good amateur standing in our town to represent us. He is a drug clerk, and his mother objected pretty strongly at first, but she's been talked over. There will be a party of at least 100 of us go down with him, and I hope you will have front seats reserved for us. Most of the boys feel inclined to wager a little on the success of our representative, but he himself does not feel very confident of the result. Upon my return, I found quite a strong feeling in favor of having the young gunsmith represent us, but after my conversation with you, could not for a moment countenance any such proceedings on our part." 2 nights following, the Prescott chairman read the following letter in answer to the one which he had sent. To R. W. Johnson, Esquire, Chairman of the Committee for the Prescott Athletic Club, Prescott, Arizona. Dear Sir, I am glad to hear that there is considerable interest taken in the forthcoming match. Boxing is a noble art, and coming contest will no doubt help boom both our clubs. There is a great interest taken here in the match, and I warn you our man is getting himself in the very best condition possible. He is nervous, of course, this being his first appearance in an affair of this kind. He is a clerk in the bank who has lately been engaged by my friend Robinson, and therefore does not get as much time for exercise as perhaps would be wise. But Robinson is an enthusiastic sport, as you know, and has arranged to let him get off several hours each day. We look forward to a great contest, and I certainly feel that the winner may fully consider himself the amateur championship of the territory. We shall take great satisfaction in reserving the 100 seats you ask for. I think you will find all the money ready for you in the way of bets that you will want. Our population is made up a great deal, as you know, largely of miners and ranchers, and they are inclined to bet recklessly. I cannot close without congratulating the Prescott Athletic Club for the energy and enterprise which they have shown in this matter. May the best man win. Yours, etc., J. Smith. There was a great crowd packed into the ring of the Phoenix Athletic Association on the evening of the contest. Seats were at a premium, and the fight had become the principal subject of conversation for days. The two principals had met and been introduced to one another. Just before going to the scene of the contest, both were dressed for the occasion, and I tell you they were sights. The bank clerk had on a collar so high he could hardly turn his head, a high silk hat, long black frock coat, and immense white rose in his buttonhole. The Prescott drug clerk was still more gorgeous. Besides a buttonhole bouquet and a high collar, he sported an eyeglass and smoked a cigarette while in the presence of his opponent. "How's your bloomin' health?" remarked the drug clerk. "I hopes as you're fit." Gone," answered the embryo financier, using only one side of his mouth. "Don't you try to jolly me, you stage-brush dude, or I'll have him poke at you right here." Several members of the committee hastened to interfere and put a stop to all further danger of trouble by hurrying the principals off to their dressing rooms to prepare for the contest. In the anteroom, Smith hugged Robinson and nearly wept with joy when they were alone. "Did you take a good look at that stiff?" he gasped. "Why, our man will punch the daylight out of him in 2 minutes after the gong sounds. Why, I say it's wrong. It's too easy. I really feel sorry for those Prescott chaps." Robinson chuckled and muttered something about fools and their money being soon parted. And then the two worthies repaired to the ringside. Smith was to be master of ceremonies, and climbing upon the raised platform, he crawled through the ropes, and after looking about him for a moment, raised his hand to enjoin silence. "Gentlemen," he said, "I must beg you all to stop smoking. Our contest, which is to be held here tonight, is to decide the amateur championship of the territory of Arizona. Nothing is more calculated to incite among our younger men the love of athletic sports than such competitions when conducted in a fair and sportsmanlike manner. I must beg of you not to allow yourselves to be biased towards indulging in any unseemly noise, in case your favorite should be worsted. What we want is a fair field and no favoritism, and while we hope our boy will win, none of you, I'm sure, would wish in any way to feel that either man was given any undue advantage. The men will fight with 3-ounce gloves, Marquis of Queensberry rules, 3 minutes to each round, with a minute's rest between. A man down to get up inside of 10 seconds or be counted out. No hitting in the clinches. Many of you are acquainted with the gentlemen who are our representatives this evening, but for the benefit of those who are not, I will introduce them." And waving his hand toward the Prescott pugilist, he said, "This is Alexander Harrington, amateur championship of the Prescott Athletic Club, who is, I may say, by profession a popular druggist in the town from which he comes." Considerable applause. "And this," he continued, pointing to the man who represented the Phoenix Club, "is J. Francis Livingston, a young man who has shown himself to be a good exponent of the noble art, and who is deemed to be an amateur championship of the Phoenix Athletic Association. He has only lately arrived, and is not very well known to many of you. I may add that he is a personal friend of our vice president, Mr. Robinson, and is employed at the bank." Wow, enthusiasm. "As there can be no question as to the amateur standing of the gentlemen, I will again beg of you to treat both men with equal favor, and will ask the referee to call time." The seconds at this climbed down from the ringside, shoving their stools out under the ropes, and the two athletes, throwing aside their bathrobes, stood up in the corners, each stripped to the buff, with the exception of tight trunks and canvas shoes. A roar of admiration and astonishment went up as the bank clerk first exposed himself, and Robinson grinned at Smith across the ring as a splendid exhibition of muscle was exhibited. It was evident that the bank clerk had not devoted all his time to banking. He was apparently as fit as a racehorse, and the muscles on his back and arms twisted and rolled about like snakes at every moment. But Robinson's expression altered somewhat as he glanced at the drug clerk. That individual was somewhat shorter than his opponent, but if the banking representative was well developed, he of the pharmaceutical persuasion was magnificent. Both men had been fanned and washed, their gloves carefully tied on, and they now stood rubbing their shoes on some powdered rosin which was scattered about the corners, eyeing each other intently. What they thought will probably never be given to the public, but there is no doubt that each must have experienced a feeling of surprise at the physical condition of his opponent. This did not affect them in the least, however, as they were both as anxious to begin as bulldogs. And when time was called and the gong rang, they danced to the middle and commenced sparring for an opening, grinning with confidence. For the first minute or two nothing was done. Forward and back they moved, their arms moving in and out, each with his eyes fixed on the face of the opponent, watching closely for an opening. Then the bank clerk jumped up and led 1, 2 without effect. His first blow was neatly guarded, and the second one brought a vicious cross-counter in return, which grazed his nose as he got back out of the way. In came the drug clerk with a rush, and they closed just as the gong sounded, which ended the round. Up through the ropes came the seconds with the activity of a lot of monkeys, and the two men were hurriedly seated upon the stools, and each was fanned furiously with a towel by 1 second, while the other bathed his neck and face with cold water. A hum of conversation arose. "Who is that bloomin' duck?" whispered the druggist to his principal second. "He ain't no bleedin' dude, I can tell yer." But before the man had time to reply, the gong sounded and the call of time, and the men sprang forward to the middle of the ring. There was no sparring this time. They went at it, biff, bang, right, left, sending their blows with all the power of their muscular bodies. The referee, almost dancing with excitement, shouted to them, "Break away!" and tried to part them when they clinched. And they were no sooner separated than they closed again, fighting with the energy and tenacity of bulldogs. Just before the time was up, the drug clerk swung his right and caught the gentleman of finance fair and square on the nose, with the result that Prescott was awarded first blood and first knockdown amid great excitement. During the 1 minute's rest, the seconds did wonders. The men were sponged and rubbed and fanned constantly with large towel. Water was squirted on their heads and the back of their necks, and at the sound of the gong, each arose from his stool looking fresh as the start. Round 3 opened as though it would be a repetition of the hurricane style of fighting of the previous round. But after a clinch or two, and giving and receiving a few good blows, the men kept apart and fought more warily. Each had evidently become satisfied that the other was not quite the easy victim he had expected. And as this conviction gradually dawned upon them, they dropped the rough and tumble style and fought with more skill and caution, each watching and waiting for an opening, hoping for a chance for a knockout. But none came, and the round closed with honors even. During the intermission, Watkins, the sheriff, who was acting referee, talked earnestly with a friend, and from time to time looked hard at the drug clerk. He turned towards the timekeeper and seemed about to say something when the bell rang, and the men were again in the middle of the ring. Round 4 had commenced. They were both fresh and eager, but the business was written all over their hard faces. They were not smiling now. Round and round they moved, constantly facing each other, their arms moving back and forth like a machine. Now and then one or the other would make a quick feint or move, and the other would spring back with the agility of a dancing master. Suddenly the financier thought he saw an opening, and let go his left, but was short, and received a counter in return which sounded all over the place. Then they went at it, hammer and tongs, and kept the referee very busy separating them and making them fight fair. Questionable prize-ring methods were resorted to by both men, and the knowledge shown by these amateurs of the little unfair tricks of the professional prize-fighter was astonishing. The bank clerk took special pains to stick his thumb in the opponent's eye whenever they clinched, and the compounder of drugs used his head and elbow in a way which is frowned upon by the advocates of fair play. The men were fighting hard and fast when the round ended. Every man in the crowd was on his feet yelling like a hyena, and they went to their corners. Referee Watkins walked up to the side of the ring, and raising his hands to enjoin silence, stood waiting for the uproar to subside. At last, when he could be heard, he addressed the crowd as follows. "Gentlemen, I am sorry to stop this fight, but I must do it. These men are supposed to be fighting for the amateur championship of the territory. Whether this is a put-up job or not, I do not know, but I do know that the Prescott man is a professional pug, lately arrived from Australia. I suspected him from the first. From the way he acted, I was pretty blamed sure he was no drug clerk, and my friend here, Jim Sweeney, swears he knows him, and that he was called the Ballarat boy when he saw him fight in Australia some 7 months ago. I can't let this thing go on and have honest men lose their money. I am not dead sure in my mind that the other man isn't a ringer. He is a damn sight too good for an amateur. But that cuts no ice. This fight stops right now. It's a draw, and all bets are off." There was a tremendous row, but the pugilists were hurried off to the respective dressing rooms, and the crowd slowly left the building. On the steps outside, Johnson, the chairman of the Prescott Athletic Club, met Smith, and going up to him, he offered him his hand. "Smith," he said, "I want to tell you how pained I am that the affair ended as it did. You, of course, do not for a moment suspect that any of us knew our man was a professional. How could he deceive us, I cannot understand. Why, I was never more fooled in my life." Smith shook hands heartily. "Don't say a word, Johnson. The best of us are often deceived, and the more pure our motives, the easier it is to fool us." "That's so." They walked on in silence a short distance. "Smith." "Hello." "Pity they stopped it. It was a lovely scrap while it lasted." "That's what it was," said Smith. The end. The Amateur Championship. Section 3 of Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by T.E. McHenry. Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales by Charles B. Cory. The Tragedy of the White Tanks.
I do not believe, said the curiosity dealer, that the bite of the Gila monster is fatal. It is poisonous, no doubt, and there have been 1 or 2 cases of death where persons have been bitten by it. But it's always well to remember that the teeth themselves may be in a condition to produce blood poisoning, which might cause death without the assistance of any particular toxic venom. The rattlesnake, however, which is rather too common in the desert, is a different sort of chap. If he strikes you, you may just as well make your will and chirp your death song as to monkey with physicians, and squander some of the good wealth which may be useful to your family. I asked him if he did not believe in the efficacy of some of the so-called Indian snake cures. There are lots of Indian remedies, he continued, and the snake charmer's cures for rattlesnake bite, which are in my opinion all poppycock. It is claimed that the Moki Indians during their snake dance allow rattlesnakes to bite them, and after applying the juice of a certain herb suffer no ill effects from the poison. This may be all right, but the antidote is considerable of a secret, and you cannot buy it at your druggist. There was a chap over in France who claimed to have produced an anti-venomous serum, which was a sure cure for the poison of the rattlesnake, or any other old snake which you might want to have bite you. I squandered $5 of my hard-earned wealth in sending for a bottle. This chap lives in Lille, France, manufactures the serum at the Pasteur Institute at that place. He gives careful directions as how much to use and just how to use it, and it may be all right with some snakes that have a reputation of being bad, but it don't go with our rattlers. I tried it in all sorts of ways. I tried to get a Mexican to experiment on, but couldn't. None of them had much faith in the cure, not enough to let a healthy snake bite 'em for $5. Then I tried dogs. I got 3 curs, all in robust health. The first one died in 15 minutes after being struck by a big rattlesnake which I had in a box, although I injected him with a carefully measured dose of the serum. Another one lived several hours and made a hard struggle. I thought at one time he might pull through, but it was no use. He joined his friend in dog heaven after giving his final kick 4 hours and 15 minutes after he and the snake had been introduced to each other. The third one was a half-breed bull bitch with lots of vitality. I tried to make this one immune by injecting a dose of the serum 24 hours before, and then again immediately after she was struck by the snake. But she did not do as well as the other one and died in 3 hours and 16 minutes. All these dogs seemed to die from an inability to breathe. The poison apparently acts on the respiratory centers rather than directly on the heart. They all vomited just before they died.
Have you never found out what the Indians use as an antidote? I asked.
No, I've tried, but they keep it a carefully guarded secret. And one reason I believe that the secret is so carefully preserved is because they have no antidote, and the whole thing is a bluff. You see, continued the collector, in my wanderings about the country, I have run across a great many queer people. And as you seem interested in the subject, I will tell you an incident which happened while I was out at camp one time at the White Tanks, catching Gila monsters, horned toads, etc. I remember the year well, because I had a lot of trouble with a very useless assistant of mine whom I had sent to Central America to collect for me. Among the birds he brought back were a lot of skins of the blue chatterer, the one with the purple throat, you know. He knew I was anxious to get new species, so he thought he'd be smart and make some for me. So he manufactured 5, all with fake labels on, showing that each species was taken in different altitudes. Unfortunately, he commenced too high, and the mountains in the vicinity where he collected and where the labels indicated that the birds were taken lacked several hundred feet of necessary altitude for the 2 species, so that if the labels were correct, he must have shot them out of a balloon. They all looked alike except about the throat and the head. One lot had a gold band across the breast, another had the whole throat gold. Others had gold stripes or spots. I believe he produced these gaudy effects with the lighted end of his cigar. He doctored up a lot of hummingbirds, too. He made me a peck of trouble. I fired him all right. Dishonesty in a trade like mine is, I think, most reprehensible. And there's no money in it, 'cause you're dead sure to get found out. He was a cute little chap, however, and he learned a lot of tricks from the Indians. He could change a bird's color by feeding it on certain kinds of food. There's a chap in Amsterdam who does about the same thing, and brightens up old worn birds which have faded out in the zoological gardens. And he sends them back with all the brilliancy of their original plumage restored. But he cannot turn a red parrot blue, or make a gray parrot with a yellow head turn bright orange all over, as this chap could. He told me how he did it, but the secret is too good to give away. But to get back to the story about the rattlesnakes. It was, as I said, in the spring of '89. A party of us were camped up at the White Tanks about 45 miles northwest of here. And one day a chap came into our camp, a half-breed Mexican Indian who called himself a snake charmer. He had a box of rattlesnakes, which he would allow to twine around his neck and bite him for $1. He traveled about the country giving exhibitions with his snakes and selling the rattlesnake cure, which was put up in small bottles containing the brown-colored liquid, which he claimed he made from a plant which was a sure cure for the bite of the rattlesnake, and a number of the boys bought this remedy, paying him $1 a bottle. He had seen our camp as he drove along the road to Phoenix, and he told us he'd been up in the country 2 or 3 weeks visiting some mines where he'd done very well selling his cure to the miners and exhibiting his snakes. There were several of us in our party, and one chap, a doctor by the name of Baker, who was always playing practical jokes. As we were coming back to Phoenix the next day, Miguel, which was the snake charmer's real name, I believe though he was generally known as Mexican John, decided to stay over a day and go back with us. Baker proposed that we should see how much faith Miguel had in his own antidote. As it happened, I had captured a very big rattlesnake the previous day, and had him in a box by my tent. By the aid of some forked sticks and bagging, we succeeded in fastening the snake so that he could not move. We then pried his mouth open and kept it open with a small stick. We took all this trouble for the purpose of preparing him to assist in the experiment, which he and Mexican John were to be the principal performers. Baker carefully cut out the poison sacs, which are situated just beneath the temporal muscle, back of the eye. It was suggested that it would be better off to remove the fangs to avoid any possibility of danger, but Baker objected. He said removing the fangs would give the whole thing away. He took the precaution, however, while the snake lay helpless with its mouth open, to carefully wash the teeth, and then filled the small openings near the end of the fangs with some dental cement, which Baker had in his outfit, which hardens in a few minutes. You see, the fangs of the rattlesnake are like 2 hypodermic syringes. They are hollow tubes, as it were, with an opening near the point, a little narrow slit, but one that is easily seen if you look for it. Through this he squirts the poison by the aid of the temporal muscle, which he contracts as he strikes. As we had removed the poison sacs and plugged up the fangs, the snake was not in very good condition to do any serious harm. He, however, was fighting mad, and evidently did not enjoy the operation which he had undergone. It did not seem to hurt him any, however, for he was as lively as a kitten, and when we let him loose in the box, he was ready and anxious to strike at anything. Toward the evening, Miguel came back to camp, and we had the snake all ready for him. It was a much larger one than those which he had in his box, and when we slipped it in among the others, we could easily recognize it from its size. The boys asked John to give an exhibition of the curative powers of his snake cure, saying that they'd like to buy some more, but wished to see it tried before doing so. John was quite ready, and after opening the bottle of the antidote and lifted the cover of his snake box, he reached in his hand to take one of them out. As he did so, he was immediately struck good and hard by the latest addition to the collection. My, how he carried on! He looked hastily into the box, and then at the marks on his hand, where the fangs cut in. He gave one screech, grabbed a knife, cut the place wide open, and commenced to suck fiercely, at the same time praying and cursing almost in the same breath. The boys begged him to apply his antidote, asking him what was the matter and why he appeared to be so frightened. But all the answer they could get was, "Don't touch me. I'm going to die. I'm going to die." And say, what do you think? He did die. He got weaker and weaker, his teeth were clenched, and he refused to take whiskey, although the boys forced some down his throat. In a little while he became insensible, and in less than an hour he was dead. Scared to death, you say? Well, maybe so. Anyway, the boys said the laugh was on Baker. The end. The Tragedy of the Whitetails.
Section 4 of Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales by Charles B. Cory. Too Close for Comfort. When Dr. Watson entered, I saw by his manner that he had something of more than usual interest to communicate. Watson has a trick of winding and unwinding his watch chain around his finger whenever he has some case in which he is particularly interested. As a rule, his work in the asylum keeps him busy the greater part of the day, and the little time he has to spare is given to cases in which he is called in consultation or by special appointment. Therefore, knowing how busy he was, I felt certain that something out of the ordinary had called him from his regular duties at this time of day, and I was interested to learn what it was. Watson is nothing if not direct, and rarely wastes words. On this occasion he certainly lived up to his reputation, for he began talking before he was fairly in the room. "My dear Morris," he said, "I have called to talk with you of a most interesting case which has lately come under my observation. It is one in which I need your help, and I hope you'll be able to spare the time to assist me." I nodded and waved him to a chair. "The case in question is a most interesting one, in which hypnotic suggestion may or may not be an important factor. You know young Blake, the son of the late Matthew Blake, and you are aware that he has been rather extravagant in his habits and ways of living, although not exactly a spendthrift. Undoubtedly spends more money than he ought to in many ways. The great trouble with him is his passion for racehorses, and that is what one of these days is going to break him financially, unless I am very much mistaken. Just now young Blake has 2 horses entered in the big race which comes off day after tomorrow at Eaton Park. One of his horses, called Emperor, is well known, and he should easily win the race. He is by far the best horse of the lot, and has been selling in the pools for 2-to-1 against the field. The other horse is not nearly as good as Emperor, and has little chance of being placed. Murphy, the jockey who is to ride Emperor, is one of the best on the turf, although comparatively a young boy, probably about 19 years old. He has ridden a number of races, and from all reports is a lad of good habits and seemingly thoroughly honest. Young Blake, as you know, plunges more or less on his horses when they run, whenever he thinks they have a fair chance to win, and in this case he has bet a great deal more money than he can afford to lose, knowing that unless the horse meets with some unforeseen accident, he is certain to win the race. As I understand it, he has bet so much money that if by any chance Emperor should lose the race, it would seriously hurt young Blake. Of course, this is all foolishness from our standpoint, but the fact remains that the young man has bet this money, and that any accident which would interfere with his pulling off that race would cause him serious loss. Knowing his father as I did, I've taken more or less interest in the boy, and have time and time again advised him to let racing alone and settle down to a more serious life. I should not have taken the special interest in this particular race had it not been that by a curious coincidence information has come to me which leads me to suspect that everything is not as it should be at young Blake's stables. Last year one of the stable boys, a lad by the name of Collins, was badly injured by an accident, and young Blake saw that he was nicely taken care of and paid him a salary during his illness. The youngster was grateful, and the other day it seems he came to Mr. Blake and told him that Murphy, the jockey who is to ride Emperor, has been sleeping badly for several nights, and talked a good deal in his sleep about the horses. Murphy and Collins sleep together in the room over the stable, and the night before last Collins was awakened by hearing Murphy call out to someone and then say distinctly, "Yes, yes, I understand. If you wave your handkerchief, I am to pull Emperor. If you do not wave it, I am to win if I can." Well, this is serious business. The boy was dreaming, of course, but why did he dream such a dream? The idea of pulling being in the boy's mind is in itself enough to cause some serious reflection. Yesterday young Blake called on me and told me this story, as it had been told to him by Collins. Collins was present at the time, and again repeated his statement, declaring positively that he could not have been mistaken in the words spoken by Murphy in his sleep, and that the boy seemed very much excited. Blake, by my advice, sent for Murphy, and we had a serious conversation with him. The boy seemed thoroughly honest, and was very much hurt upon being questioned in regard to this matter. He said that he had worked for Blake several years, and had always tried to do right, and that he intended to ride his best and win the race if he could. Blake naturally feels somewhat disturbed under the circumstances, but he believes the boy is honest, and he believes young Collins must be in some way have been mistaken in what he imagines he heard, or if he was not mistaken, that Murphy was dreaming and the words had no significance. He told Murphy to go back to the stables, and that he would trust him implicitly, stating at the same time that it would cause him serious inconvenience if by any chance Murphy should not win, as he had bet a large amount of money on the result. Murphy, with tears in his eyes, thanked him for trusting him, and went back to the stables. Afterwards I had a serious conversation with Collins, and learned that on 2 occasions he had seen Murphy talking with a strange man who often visited the track. Upon inquiry we've learned that the man in question is a brother of a man who married Murphy's sister, and that Murphy had met him several times at his sister's house. The man's name is Sims. He is a low character, who is known as a habitual frequenter of the race track, and who at times does business as a pool seller and a bookmaker. Sims is described as being thin and dark, with a big scar on his right cheek. He usually wears a soft hat and carries a cane with considerable silver about the handle. Last night I decided to have an interview with Murphy and find out whether the lad could be hypnotized or not. Why this idea suggested itself to me, I don't know, except that, as you know, hypnotism is one of my hobbies. With Blake's consent I sent for Murphy and asked him to let me look him over, as I'd like to assure Blake as to his physical condition, as naturally he was feeling, as I told him, somewhat nervous after our interview of the morning. The boy consented readily enough, and after listening to his heart and asking him a few questions which might suggest a cause for his restlessness at night, I asked him to look at me fixedly while I gently stroked his forehead above the eyes with my hand. Imagine my surprise when I found him to be an extremely sensitive, hypnotic subject. He did not become entirely unconscious, but was in a peculiar somnambulistic condition in which he conversed readily enough. He's one of the best subjects for post-hypnotic suggestion that I've ever seen. I tried several experiments with him, and the thought occurred to me if it was not possible that this susceptibility to hypnotic suggestion might be used by unscrupulous persons in many ways, which might be especially dangerous in case he was riding a good horse in a race. Upon questioning Murphy, after I had awakened him, regarding his susceptibility to hypnotic influence, he told me that Sims had often put him to sleep for fun when they met at his sister's house. The question which now presents itself is, suppose he has been hypnotized and has been given a post-hypnotic suggestion that he is to pull emperor if a certain man waves his handkerchief. How are we to prevent his carrying out these instructions? Of course, we can take the boy off the horse and put on another jockey, but Blake does not wish to do this. In his waking moments, Murphy does not remember anything that has been told him while hypnotized, and I doubt if we can make Blake believe that there is any real danger in that quarter. Again, if we allow him to go in and ride the race, it is more than possible that he could be made to win or lose the race by any one who had given him orders while in a hypnotic condition. And we also know that he would forget entirely that he had received such orders after waking. Now, the difficulty presents itself as to how we can prevent him following out such instructions in case he has received them. We know we cannot affect such suggestions by re-hypnotizing him, because we do not know the exact circumstances under which such directions were given. To merely hypnotize and tell him he is not to carry out such orders would have no effect whatever. Perhaps if we could tell him that under certain described circumstances he was not to carry out such orders, we might succeed. But my experience has been that the directions as given are carried out by the subject if at the time the circumstance described, which is to be recognized as a signal for such and such action on the part of the hypnotized sensitive, occurs and is noticed. For instance, if I should hypnotize a young man and say that at 8 o'clock, when he hears the clock strike, he should at once go downstairs and get a glass of water, he would undoubtedly do it when the clock struck 8. But if the clock did not strike 8, supposing someone had removed the striker, and when near the hour someone occupied his attention so that he did not notice the time, in all probability he would not obey orders. It requires some special occurrence which has been described in connection with the act to suggest it again to his mind. In my opinion, the best we can do is to let Murphy ride the race, and to take all precautions possible to prevent any man waving his handkerchief to Murphy during the race. Of course, to have any real effect on the race, the person waving his handkerchief as a signal for Murphy to pull Emperor must do so far enough from the home stretch to make it certain that Emperor can be prevented from winning without attracting special attention, which could not be done in case Emperor was in the lead if the signal was given close to the grandstand. We therefore must look out for our man, if such a man there be, some distance down the racetrack. Now, if you will go to the track with me tomorrow, we will station ourselves in places where we think it likely that such a man would stand, and keep a sharp watch for a thin, dark man with a scar on his cheek. Will you join me?" I assured him I would be more than willing to do so, as I was very much interested in the case. "Good. Now this is my plan. I shall take Mike Fallon with me, and he's worth a half-dozen men in case of a row. I've also engaged 3 private detectives to be on the watch at the entrance to the grandstand, and another at the entrance to the grounds, while a 5th is to be stationed himself at the side of the track, and do sentinel duty about the half-mile post, with orders to report to me the moment Sims puts in an appearance, and to have him shadowed. Of course, this elaborate plot may exist only in my imagination, but if, as I believe, there is a carefully arranged scheme to beat Blake's horse, we shall have done him a good turn, and perhaps saved him a lot of money. I must go now, but don't fail to meet me tomorrow at 11 at the track. You will find me in front of the grandstand." The next morning, when I arrived at the track, I found Dr. Watson in conversation with a powerful-looking man, whom he introduced to me as Mike Fallon. We walked slowly up the track to a point about a quarter of a mile from the finish. There was a great crowd of people present. The numbers had gone up for the first race, and most of the horses were already out and warming up. Emperor appeared to be in splendid condition as he galloped easily up and down in front of the grandstand. His great muscles rolled and swelled under the shiny skin, and he looked and acted like a horse fit to race for his life. He was a prime favorite at the pools, and was selling at 2 to 1 against the field. "I have seen Blake," said Watson, "and he's feeling confident Emperor will win. He is somewhat nervous, of course, but he tells me the horse is in first-class shape, and that Murphy is all right. No signs of Sims yet, and the race will be started in less than 10 minutes. It begins to look as though I have been frightened at a shadow." At this moment a man touched Watson on the arm and whispered something to him, and then moved quickly away through the crowd. Watson started, and turning to me said, "Come this way. Sims is here. He's down the track below the gate." He hurried away, Mike and I following, and upon getting clear of the crowd we saw a man leaning against the picket fence which separated the track from the carriage drive, watching the horses through a small field glass. As we came up, Sims, for it was he, glanced suspiciously at us, but as we paid no attention to him and talked earnestly together, apparently arguing as to the relative merits of the horses, he soon ceased to notice us and turned again to the horses. Hardly had he done so when he hurriedly put the glass in his pocket, and a great shout from the grandstand and cries of "They're off!" told us that the great race had commenced. We could see the horses far off on the opposite side of the track, all running in a bunch until they neared the half-mile flag, when 2 were seen to be well in advance of the others. As they swung around the curve, we could see the red cap worn by Murphy flashing in the sun, and we knew that Emperor was leading. But another horse, a deep bay, the jockey dressed completely in blue, was very close to him. On they came, and Watson and Mike edged closer and closer to Sims, whose whole attention was fixed on the race. His face was flushed, and he was actually dancing with excitement. We watched him as a cat watches a mouse, and it was very lucky for Blake that we did so. The horses were now quite near us, and we could see Murphy plainly, and noticed how white and drawn his face looked. Suddenly Sims pulled a large white handkerchief from his pocket, but as he did so the doctor snatched it from his hand, and at the same instant Mike seized him in his powerful arms and dragged him from the fence. Mad with surprise and rage, he struggled and kicked like a wild animal. "Damn you!" he yelled. "Let me go! Let me go, I say! What in hell do you mean?" "Let him go, Mike," said the doctor. Mike pushed Simms from him, and he staggered back against the fence. The man was crazy with rage, and I believe for the moment he was really insane. He half crouched, as if to spring at us, snarling and showing his teeth like a savage dog. Then his hand went to his pocket. "I wouldn't try that if I were you, Simms," said Watson quietly. "You'll get the worst of it if you do." Watson's right hand was in the pocket of his sack coat, and his eyes said, "I'll shoot," as plainly as if he had told Simms in so many words. "See here, you," cried Mike, "if you pull a gun I'll smash your jaw." Simms looked from one to the other of us with the expression of a madman. His face was ghastly white, and the scar on his cheek stood out livid in contrast with the white skin. I thought for a moment he was about to draw his revolver, but suddenly he turned and ran toward the crowd, and in a moment was lost to our view. The shouting and cheering still kept up, and as we hurried toward the grandstand, Watson asked a man which horse had won. "Emperor by a length, a great race." We found Blake in front of the stand. He came to us and shook hands. His face was beaming with the joy of success. "Do you know," he said, "I do believe that something is the matter with Murphy. He was as pale as a ghost after the race. He said he could remember nothing about it until he found himself in the home stretch running neck and neck with Nettie B. Then he seemed to wake from a dream and sat down and rode Emperor for all he was worth. You know the rest. He won out all right, but I tell you it was a confounded sight too close for comfort." End of Too Close for Comfort.
Section 5 of Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ryan Lothian. Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales by Charles B. Cory. The Strange Powder of the Juju Priests. Dr. Watson carefully opened the little antique silver box, which was about the size and shape of an ordinary watch, and showed that it contained a grey powder and a little gold measure resembling a miniature thimble. It was evidently old, the cover being worn smooth in many places, nearly effacing the peculiar hieroglyphics with which it had once been engraved. "I consider this," he said, "my chef d'oeuvre, my star exhibit, as it were. The powder possesses such wonderful properties, and is so unlike any known drug, that I hesitate to describe its effects. That it is a powerful poison there can be no doubt, but when taken in small doses it is apparently harmless enough." "What is its history?" asked Dr. Farrington. "I picked it up in London. Got it from Burridge, the explorer, who had just returned from a year's trip in the interior of West Africa. He went into Benin City with the English when they cleared out the town. Burridge said he took it from a dead Juju priest, and he made me pay a pretty stiff price for it. It is a wonderful drug, entirely unknown outside of Africa. Burridge thinks that it is made from the leaves of some plant, but its preparation is a secret to the priests of the Juju. Now I propose that we each take a small quantity of the powder tonight, and then dine together tomorrow evening and compare notes. I may as well tell you now, it produces strange hallucinations. I tried it once myself, and my experience on that occasion was, to say the least, peculiar. Therefore I am more than anxious to try it again, and compare notes with you afterwards, and I think I can promise you a new and novel experience." Farrington and Forster were perfectly willing to try the experiment which Watson hinted promised such interesting results, and it was agreed that each should take a dose of the powder before retiring, and meet together the next evening. Promptly, at the time appointed, the three men met in Watson's study, and after cigars had been lighted, Watson asked Farrington to be the first to relate his experience, whereupon the doctor drew from his pocket several pages of closely written manuscript, and began as follows: "An Aztec Mummy. Dr. Farrington's story. I was standing in a museum, looking at a case of mummies. One of them was marked, Mummy of Aztec, found in a cliff dwelling, and it interested me very much. In size it was that of a small man, and was in a fine state of preservation, with the exception that the bones of the legs were exposed and more or less disintegrated in some places. The hands, even to the fingernails, were perfect, however, and there was a silver ring on the index finger. One hand grasped a large stone axe, the handle being modern. The right hand rested across the chest, clasping a necklace of silver wire. "Interesting specimen, is it not?" said a voice at my side. "Quite so," I replied, "but I doubt if it really is an Aztec mummy." "What makes you think that?" asked the voice sharply. "Because I don't believe the Aztecs buried their dead in cliff dwellings. However, it is an interesting mummy, and in a wonderful state of preservation." I was so interested in examining the mummy that I had spoken without turning my head. Now, however, I looked up and saw a tall, gaunt figure of a man, dressed in a suit of corduroy, and wearing a broad-brimmed hat, or sombrero, such as is generally worn on the western plains. "Well," he remarked, "in my opinion it is a pretty good mummy. I made it myself, and ought to know." "Excuse me, what did you say?" I asked, thinking I had not understood him aright. "I said that it was one of my mummies." "What do you mean by that, sir?" I asked. "You will understand when I tell you I was a dealer in curiosities, and during my time I furnished museums with a great many interesting and valuable specimens. When trade was slow, I occasionally helped nature a little, but that is all over now." "Have you given up the business?" I asked. "Had to, but perhaps you do not know that I am dead," answered my companion. "Fell off a cliff last year and broke my neck." "Did you indeed?" I answered, trying to appear interested. "That's what I did. But let me tell you about that mummy. There was a scientific chap who came to our place and wanted to buy Aztec relics. Me and my partner made a trade with him and sold him a lot of stuff, but he was very anxious to be taken where he could dig up some for himself, to be sure of the authenticity and antiquity of the relic. Well, me and my part figured that it might be to our advantage to take him to a good cliff dwelling, and we arranged that he should pay us so much for everything he dug up. If he found a mummy, we got $100. If stone hatchets and axes, $2 each. Arrowheads, 10 cents each. For stone matats and grinders, $1 each, taking them as they came, and whole pottery, $5. "Where did you find the mummy? Did you know of the cave?" I asked. "Well, we knew there were lots of caves, and where there were Indian graveyards. With the aid of a little stain and judicious arrangement of the body, we've prepared a fine Aztec mummy. Of course we used the body of an Indian, one who'd been dead for a long time and was dried up and crumbly. My partner was a clever chap, and he fixed up the axe and the silver necklace, and we took the outfit and started for the Verde Cañon. We picked out a good-sized cave and dug a hole in the floor, in which we carefully placed the mummy and covered him up with dry dust. Then we wet the clay over him, leaving the floor hard and smooth as before. We also buried about 50 axes and 200 or 300 arrowheads, and half a dozen nice specimens of Indian pottery, which we burned up good and black. After we had salted the cave to our satisfaction, we partly sealed up the entrance and returned to Flagstaff. Was that acting quite fair? Fair? Why, how do you think the poor man would have felt if he'd come all the way to Arizona and gone to all the expense of his carfare and outfit, and found nothing? It was philanthropy, my dear sir, the height of philanthropy." "Was he pleased with the mummy?" "Pleased? Why, bless your dear innocent soul, he screamed with joy like a child, and when we accidentally discovered a piece of toe while digging in the bottom of the cave, he dropped to his knees and removed every particle of dirt with his hands, and almost cried over it. He carried on so that my partner nearly gave us away. He was a chump about some things. If anything pleased him, he would laugh, and his laugh sounded like the bray of a jackass." "Well, sir, when this scientific chap got down on his knees and commenced to pull the earth away from the fake mummy, my partner began to gurgle. I knew what was coming and punched him in the ribs, but it did no good. The scientific chap looked up and asked what was the matter. "Matter?" shouted my pard, and then he roared and yelled and howled. A look of doubt and annoyance came into our victim's eyes, but Pard saved himself just in time. "Look!" he yelled between his paroxysms of laughter. "Look at that buzzard over there! I'm damned if he ain't the funniest buzzard I ever saw in my life!" And then he roared and yelled and jumped about. "Look at him!" he laughed. "See him fly! Did you ever see anything so funny?" I'm not sure but what the scientist thought he was crazy, but anyhow he didn't catch on to what he was laughing at, and pretty soon went on with his digging. We stayed there 3 days and dug the whole place up, and took back with us a basket full of stone axes, arrowheads, 3 large prehistoric vases, and the mummy. He drove the wagon himself every step of the way, for fear something would get broken, and when we got to Flagstaff, he spent 2 days packing the relics. "Do you consider that sort of thing quite honourable?" I asked. "Honourable? What is that you say, you squint-eyed dude? Now, my boy, don't get fresh with me just because I am dead and can't jump you." I hastened to pacify him. "Well, that's all right, but if you'd said that to me last year, when I was alive, I would have marked squares all over your body with a piece of chalk, and then played hopscotch on you." "I meant no offence," I said humbly. "Maybe you didn't, but just you make another break like that, and I won't forget it. You will have to die sometime, and then, oh mamma!" "Is your partner dead?" I asked. "No, Jim is not dead by a long shot. I went down to see him last winter at his place in California, where he has opened up a new store. He has a good tourist trade, made a lot of money this year out of mermaids and sea devils. There was a run on sea devils this winter. He makes them out of fishes. The mermaids he makes out of fishes' tails and Indian children. Robs the graveyards, you know. Some of them are really fine and artistic. I tell you he is an artist in his line. He has a branch store somewhere in New Mexico, and made a stack of money last winter in Navajo blankets and scalp-trimmed Indian arms and shields. It is the scalp trimming which catches the tourist. He gets most of his scalps from California, from hospitals there, but when he is short, horsehair does pretty well, especially for old Indian scalps. And then Navajo blankets. Holy smoke, a gold mine isn't in it. They make 'em out of Germantown wool and aniline dyes, and they cost at the factory all the way from 6 bits to $10, and sell to the tourist for various prices, sometimes as high as $75 or $80. Oh, I tell you, he is shrewd. Some day he'll be worth $1 million. Sometimes a chap goes into his shop and poses as an expert. Those are the kind of jays that fill Jim's soul with joy. The fellow will pull over a pile of blankets, and after looking at them wisely will say, "Haven't you got any real good blankets? These are Germantown wool and mineral dyes." "Ah, I see you know something about blankets." "Oh yes, a little," answers the expert. "The fine old style blankets are mighty hard to get now," remarks Jim. "I know they are," remarks the wise tourist, "but still they are to be had sometimes, are they not? Come now, haven't you got something choice hidden away?" Then Jim will look about, as though fearful that somebody might see him, and will steal softly into a back room, and pull from beneath his bed a good cheap blanket, worth about $3, and spread it out lovingly in front of the tourist. "There," he whispers, "look at that. That is not for sale. I am keeping that for myself. But I thought you would like to see it, as it is very evident you know a good deal about blankets. Isn't it a beauty?" Then the tourist bites, and asks him what it is worth, and admires it, agrees with him as to the splendid old dyes and fine preservation of the native wool prepared in the manner of the old Navajo, speaks of its great rarity, and at last ends by asking Jim what he will take for it, and usually carries it away with him, having paid 3 or 4 times the value of a really good blanket. I've seen Jim pull their legs so hard they'd be pretty limp when they went out. Ah, those were the happy days. The departed heaved a deep sigh, and gazed silently at his handiwork. "Well," he said, "I must be going. I have a lot of things I want to do before morning, but hope to run across you again sometime. Glad you like the mummy. I forgot to mention that most of the teeth were gone when we first got it, and Jim put in a fine new set, and improved it a whole lot." I glanced at the mummy, and when I looked up again, my companion had disappeared. End of The Strange Powder of the Juju Priest and an Aztec Mummy, Recording by Ryan Lothian.
Section 6 of Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales by Charles B. Cory. A Lesson in Chemistry. Mr. Foster's Story. I took the powder as agreed, and sat down to read the evening paper before retiring, with the result that I did not retire at all. I became much interested in an article on new explosives with which the government had been lately experimenting, and had nearly finished it, when I heard a voice say to me, "Interesting subject, isn't it?" I turned and saw seated on my lounge a peculiar-looking man. His clothes seemed to be all run in together. You could make out the outlines of the man, but the figure was not clear, sort of foggy, you know. What surprised me most was that I could look right through him and see the back of the lounge. I said to myself, is this a dream, or the effect of the powder I've taken? And I pinched my leg and rubbed my eyes, but although I seemed to be perfectly wide awake, the shape did not disappear. "What did you say?" I asked. "I remarked that the subject of high explosives was decidedly interesting," answered the shape. "I was a chemist when alive, but it makes me sad to think how very little I really knew. Chemistry, as well as other branches of science, has made great strides during the past generation, since my day, but even now they really know very little." But I answered, "It seems to me the high explosives which we now have are sufficiently powerful if we knew how to use them with safety." "That's it," answered the shape. "Now I have a couple of hours to spare, and if it would interest you, and you care to come over to my laboratory, I will be happy to give you 1 or 2 points which may prove of value to you. I say to my laboratory, but it really is not mine. I use any laboratory that is handiest, and I know most of the good ones in the city. You see, I do not need to have a key to enter a room. That's one of the great advantages we have, as you will discover one of these days. Just now I can get you in very well, because the owner of the laboratory to which we will go is out of town. I will go in first and unlock the door for you." I told him that I should be most happy to accept his invitation. It seemed the most natural thing in the world to be conversing with a ghost, and to have him invite me to go to somebody's laboratory and use up his chemicals. It never occurred to me that it might not be considered quite good form. We went out of my rooms and downstairs, the shadow floating alongside of me in the most friendly manner possible. I could see by the position of his body that he had hold of my arm, but his fingers did not show on my coat sleeve. We went uptown for perhaps half a mile, and entered a large brick building in which I noticed were various studios. It was dark, but going up 3 flights of stairs, my guide opened the door and ushered me into a large and extensively furnished laboratory, evidently belonging to some scientific man of means and experience. The ghost turned the button of the electric light and then motioned me to a seat. "My time," he said, "is somewhat limited, because I have an appointment with a lady at 12, but I'll show you what a high explosive really is, and then if we have time we will talk of something else. The difficulty about high explosives is not in making them, but in using them after they are made. You create a gigantic power which you do not know how to handle. The rather modern discovery of how to make liquid air has simplified matters a good deal. When you can make liquid hydrogen in quantities, you will have a still better agent for many purposes. Now let us take a little of this liquid air. You see, it pours like water. As I happen to know our absent host has nearly 2 gallons of it, or had this afternoon. Some of it has evaporated, but as you see there is still more than a gallon left, and we will not steal much, as all we want for our experiment to illustrate to you the greatest explosive which can be manufactured is about as much liquid air as you can hold in a thimble. "Do you propose to try your explosive here, Mr. I hesitated. "By the way, what is your name?" "Oh, call me any old name. It doesn't matter." "Mr. Spook, shall we say?" "Ahem. A little personal, perhaps, but it will do as well as another. Now, as I was saying, I will show you how to make the most powerful explosive that was ever invented." It is possible that I did not show as much interest and enthusiasm as he expected, and to tell the truth, I was a little nervous. Spooks do not have the same interest in being careful in their experiments. An accident or two is of little consequence to them, but might be decidedly disagreeable to me. I may have shown something of what I was thinking in my manner, for Spook looked at me keenly. "What's the matter? You do not appear interested." "On the contrary," I answered, "I am deeply so, but do we not run considerable risk in trying such experiments in a laboratory without the consent of its owner?" "Not at all, not at all. I will use a very small amount of the explosive, and there will be no damage done." "Have you attempted to make it before, Mr. Spook?" I ventured. "Oh, yes, last week. That was a mistake, you see. Now I know all about it. I didn't then. The explosion was something awful. It blew the building pretty much all to pieces. If I had been alive, I don't believe you could have found a piece of me as large as your finger. They called it spontaneous combustion. However, we won't have anything of that kind tonight." "Please don't," I answered. "No, I promise you. Now we'll take a little of this red phosphorus" ordinary phosphorus will not answer, "and pour a little liquid air on it, stirring it gently, as you see. Now if I should let that dry, it would explode at the slightest touch. But we do not want that, and we wish to increase its power, so we add a little chloride of potassium. Now watch it dry. See the color change to a light red-brown? There, if you should strike that, or put fire to it, it would wreck this building as completely as if you had exploded 50 pounds of dynamite in it." I drew away from the table instinctively. "Have no fear, I will not explode it. Now watch me closely. I will ignite a minute quantity, about as much as would make the head of a small black pin or a No. 4 bird shot. See, the rest we will put in this pail of water. There, now all is ready. Here goes." He lit a match and touched the little brown dot. A tremendous explosion followed, and the wooden table was split into pieces. The sound was so terrific, and the shock so unexpected, that I was dizzy and frightened. "Great heavens!" I exclaimed, "you've broken everything in the laboratory." "No," replied the ghost, rather shamefacedly, "not so bad as that, but I'm afraid I have ruined the table and cracked a few things. However, I'll be more careful next time. It's even more powerful than I thought. What do you suppose would be the effect on a warship if struck with a shell containing 100 pounds of that stuff?" I answered that she would be destroyed. "Destroyed? I should say she would. The largest battleship would be blown to atoms." The Spook glanced at an old-fashioned Dutch clock in the corner of the laboratory. "Fine clock that. Glad I didn't break it with our little racket just now. I see I have nearly an hour to spare. Is there any experiment you'd like to try?" I said anything would interest me, but that I didn't care for any more explosives. "I suppose you know how to make diamonds, don't you?" I answered that for years men have tried to manufacture diamonds, but practically without success. That as far as I was aware, they had only succeeded in making them so small as to be practically of no use commercially, and the expense of the manufacture was far in excess of their value. "That's all right," answered the Spook, "but really it's a very simple matter. Here, I'll make a diamond for you." He walked across the room to the fireplace, and taking from the grate a lump of coal about the size of a billiard ball, he laid it upon the table. "This," he said, "is nearly pure carbon, and as you are well aware, it is practically what a diamond is. Now I will illustrate to you how you may make a diamond from this piece of coal, which will be as good as any diamond ever found in the mines. We will manufacture it instead of letting nature do it. We will first place it in this glass bowl, and pour over it sufficient liquid air to cover it completely. We will let it remain until it is thoroughly cold, say at least 200 degrees below zero. There. Now all we have to do is to heat it, and then subject it to a powerful Great Jehoshaphat! 5 minutes to 12. I must go. Appointment with a lady at 12. But I say, old fellow, just hold it under the blowpipe and get it hot, just as hot as you can. I'll be back soon. Ta-ta!" His last words came to me faintly through the window. He had already floated out. I took the queer-colored piece of coal and began heating it under the blowpipe. It did not burn, as I thought it would, but turned red and then white, and gradually it seemed to grow larger and larger and brighter, until I opened my eyes and found myself in bed with the sun shining full upon me through the open window. End of a lesson in chemistry.
Section 7 of Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales by Charles B. Cory. An Interesting Ghost. Dr. Watson's Story. "It is with the greatest difficulty," said Dr. Watson, "that I forced myself to believe that what I am about to relate to you did not actually happen. It seemed to me that I was as wide awake as I am at this present moment, and impossible that the strange series of incidents could be due entirely to mental disturbances. I went home and went to bed, after first taking the powder, and I think I went to sleep. How long I slept I do not know, but I was startled at finding myself floating about the room with much the same feeling as one has when floating in water, only it was without effort. My motions seemed to be governed entirely by my will. If I glanced at anything in the room, I would float towards it. Imagine my astonishment at seeing my body lying in the bed, apparently sound asleep. You will admit the sensation was novel, to say the least. After floating around the room 2 or 3 times, enjoying the peculiar sensation, I began to wonder what they had been doing at the hospital during my absence. Immediately I found myself in the hospital ward. Dr. Ford and 2 nurses were standing by a cot at the north end, and glancing at the chart on the table, I saw the patient was seriously ill. "Moribund," said a voice. "I'm afraid so," I answered. I turned and saw an elderly gentleman dressed in the costume of the last century floating beside me. "Sad, is it not? People still die, I see, in spite of the wonderful advance in the science of medicine since my day." "Were you a doctor when alive?" I asked. "Well, I was called one, and received the regular license to kill or cure. I regret to say that I have since learned that I killed a great many more than I cured. The trouble is, after you are dead, your patients know this as well as you do, and say unkind things. Even tonight I received word from a former patient of mine, and a ghost who ought to know better, to the effect that he intended to hunt me up and punch my head. I treated him for renal colic, and he died of appendicitis." "What sort of death certificate did you give?" I asked. "Heart disease, and let me tell you that it was a great deal nearer to it than some of you chaps get nowadays." "You are not complimentary," I said, coldly. "Perhaps not, but if you think my criticisms harsh and uncalled for, let us get down to cold facts. Did it ever occur to you how very few people live to be even 125 years old? You surely will admit that there is no reason why a man should not live to that age, barring accidents. We know that in Bible times there were lots of old fellows who passed their 300th birthday, and a chap named Methuselah claimed to be 999 years old." "969, was it not?" I asked. "Perhaps you're right, but 69 or 99. I am inclined to be a little skeptical about that record myself. There is one thing in its favor, however, and that is that he made it an even 999, and not 1,000. Of course, you know there are plenty of people living today who are over 100 years old, and some who have reached the very satisfactory age of 125. Most of them, however, live in Bulgaria, Mexico, or some out-of-the-way place, and are so poor that they have to live abstemiously. Then you consider the secret of longevity to be a matter of diet? Said I. Partly that, and partly proper care of the nervous system. But come downstairs. Let us have a cigarette. I'm dying for a smoke. We floated down to the office, which happened to be unoccupied at the time. The medical ghost helped himself to a cigarette from the trayful on the mantelpiece, and, lighting it, he seated himself in an armchair and puffed away with evident enjoyment. I noticed the smoke, which he inhaled continually, oozed from all parts of his body. "My dear fellow," he said impressively, "you must understand that all diseases are caused by germs. Microscopic bugs and plants, you know, many of them so small that they are invisible to an ordinary microscope, or, if seen at all, are not recognized. There are thousands and thousands of them, and each and every one has its mission in life, and preys upon and destroys other germs. Now, the human body is constantly getting a lot of germs inside of it, which do not belong there. Some are taken in by the lungs while floating in the air, some by the stomach, by the food and drink, some by the skin, etc. These germs are met by their natural enemies, which live in man's blood, his bodyguard, as it were, and are destroyed. But if the attacking army is very large, or for some reason the home army has been weakened and decimated, then the invaders flourish, establish themselves, and wax powerful and strong, and the man becomes what is called sick. Come," he said, rising abruptly, and throwing the unconsumed end of his cigarette into the fireplace, "come with me to the laboratory, and I will show you in about 2 minutes more than I could explain if I talked for years, and a great deal more satisfactorily." We floated down to the laboratory, and the ghost took from the shelf a wide-mouthed bottle and held it up to the light. "Here," he said, "we have a culture. You, of course, understand how the germs of disease are cultivated for experimental use. It is needless for me to explain to you that certain media are used for these cultures, such as milk, beef broth, etc. Here we have the germ of diphtheria, here of tuberculosis, here of typhoid fever, etc. That little short jar over yonder contains some cholera bacilli, which have been lately sent here. Now, look at this typhoid germ. If we took a drop of healthy blood and put some of these typhoid germs in it, how they would wiggle! But if the drop of blood was from a typhoid patient, they won't wiggle very long, as you know. See this blunt-headed chap which we have to stain to see properly, even with this wonderful microscope. That is our old friend the bacillus of tuberculosis. But unless you see the patient first, I do not believe you could distinguish him from the leprosy bug. These are known germs. But look through the glass at this drop, and you will see some bugs worth seeing, although the medical fraternity have not as yet discovered their value. Perhaps you know that the most bacteriologists consider these germs to be plants, not bugs, although they admit some of them move a little. How astonished they would be if they could look through this glass! See that chap with green hind legs. He preys on the typhoid germ, and when they discover this, physicians will simply inoculate the patient with a lot of these little chaps with the green legs, and they will do the rest. Here is a germ with yellow stripes which looks a little like a diminutive potato bug. He is the deadly enemy of the bug of consumption, and will attack and kill him on every possible occasion. They are about evenly matched, but I think the little striped chap is a bit the better. Another ghost and myself made a match the other night. 7 battles, the result to decide the championship. A sort of a bugging main, as it were. I won. The first 6 matches were even. We won 3 each, but in the 7th my striped bug got the tubercular germ down and shook him as a terrier does a rat. The other ghost and myself nearly had a fight to get our eyes to the microscope. I tell you, it was exciting. There's my champion bug now. See him? The one with the 4th hind leg gone. But how, I asked, are you going to prevent people from dying of old age? Of course they will die of old age, but there is no such thing as old age under 150 years. What you call old age is not old age at all. There are 2 kinds of old age, or senility. Old age, properly speaking, results from a distinct modification of the nervous tissues and a hardening of the arteries. The former caused by unnatural conditions, nervous strain and dissipation, and the latter from overfeeding and drinking. The trouble with the ordinary man is that he absorbs great quantities of nitrogenous foods instead of making his diet one of nuts, fruit, milk, etc. In comparatively young men of the present age, there is often a decided modification of the nervous tissues, with symptoms resembling those in neurasthenia. In such cases, galvanic treatment will restore the centers to their normal condition. You will, therefore, I think, admit that with a proper diet and possibly the aid of a galvanic battery, a man may live, barring possible death by violence, say, 200 years. You mean, I said, when we have learned to combat the various disease germs by pitting against them their natural enemies? Exactly, of course, answered the shade. But it seems to me that we have talked long enough. I'm becoming very dry, so let us repair to the Waldorf and have a cocktail. How is it possible? I asked. You can take a cocktail, there being nothing tangible about you. Of course, answered the ghost. It is impossible for me to actually drink a cocktail. I can, however, float over the bar and inhale the pleasing odors arising from the various concoctions served to the guests, and in my ethereal condition I enjoy the odors and am affected by them as much as if I were really drinking the liquid. We floated from the house and downtown until we reached the brilliantly lighted Waldorf Hotel. There were many people in the bar-room, and the medical shade and myself, floating about over the different tables, inhaled with decided enjoyment the delicate aroma of the various mixed drinks so dear to the present generation. To my annoyance, my shade companion soon began to sing. He was evidently affected by the odors which had passed through him. His manner became familiar, and I had great difficulty in keeping him from kicking the glasses off the tables. At last I succeeded in getting him out of the room, and it was time, for as we floated into the street he began shouting in a most uproarious manner, and I was afraid that we should be arrested for disturbing the peace. "Be quiet, I beg of you," I pleaded. "See that policeman on the opposite side of the street? We shall surely get into trouble if you make such a noise." "Policeman?" hiccuped the shade. "What the devil do I care for a policeman? Watch me go over and punch him in the stomach." In spite of all I could do to prevent him, he started straight for the officer, who was standing all unconscious on the corner, watching a pretty girl who was looking into one of the brilliantly lighted store windows. Now was my time to rid myself of this most undesirable companion, and I wished myself in my own room. Instantly I found myself floating about over my bed, and there was my body sleeping as peacefully as ever. I was somewhat tired, but I remembered our contract to write down the result of our experiences, and immediately sat down to do it. After I had written it, I read it over carefully to see if I had overlooked anything, and then wished myself in bed and asleep. The next thing I knew, it was broad daylight. There, on my writing table, were the pages of manuscript which I had written. They were real enough, whether the rest was a dream or not. End of An Interesting Ghost.
Section 8 of Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ginger Kukolo. Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales by Charles B. Cory. The Mound of Eternal Silence. I ought to know something about it, said the drummer, for I went with the prospector and the Eastern man to see Judson. I remember when we started out together, the Eastern man asked the prospector if he thought Judson was really crazy. Yes, said the prospector, he is as crazy as a loon, as you will see when you get there. Tell me the story over again, said the Eastern man. Well, you see, said the prospector, they found him lying in the hot sand away off on the desert, with his head propped up against a rock, nearly dead for want of water. When they tried to rouse him, he stared at them vacantly. They gave him a little water, and as soon as he swallowed it, he fought like a wild animal for more. It took 3 or 4 of them to hold him. He cursed and swore at them because they would not give him all he wanted, and his cries were pitiful. He alternately cursed and screamed for water, sometimes as loud as he could shout, and then again in faint whispers. Later on, when they dared to give him more at a time, he became tranquil, and towards night, after he had drunk a bowlful of thin oatmeal gruel, he went to sleep. When he awoke, they questioned him. He said that he had been prospecting with his partner, and had found a gulch with precipitous cliffs all around it, where there was very rich placer digging. Directly in front was a high mound covered with big cacti, and they made their camp on the top of this. There was a little water in the canyon held in rock basins, and with this they washed out the gold and got a lot of it. Judson says $3,000 or $4,000 worth. Then bad luck came, and the burro died. 3 days afterwards, Judson's partner was poisoned in some way, and died a few hours later, cursing Judson and saying he had poisoned him. Judson buried him and also the gold. It was too heavy for him to pack, especially as he had no way to carry water. Then taking a small bag of gold dust in his pocket, he started across the desert. He had a hobby for taking photographs, and carried a small camera with him, and before leaving he photographed the place which he called the Mound of Eternal Silence, so that in case anything happened to him, it could be found without trouble. They developed the negatives later. He has them pasted all around his room. He called the place the Mound of Eternal Silence because during the 2 months he was there he never saw or heard a single living thing except jackrabbits and a bird or two. What was that about his killing the dog? Asked the Eastern man. Well, you see, when Judson started off alone, the dog would not leave his dead master, and sat upon the hill, howling. Judson was afraid he would attract somebody's attention if they happened along that way, and after trying to get him to follow him without success, he went back and shot him. First thing that Judson saw when he awoke the next morning after they found him was the dog sitting on his haunches looking at him. Judson looked at the animal but said nothing. Something within him forced him to keep his silence. After a time he snapped his fingers and called the dog by name. "Did you speak?" asked one of the men. Stevens it was, I believe. "I was only calling the dog," said Judson. "What dog?" asked Stevens. "Why, that dog, of course," said Judson, pointing at the animal. "You are crazy, man," answered Stevens. "The heat yesterday was too much for you. There is no dog there." Judson turned away. He began to fear there might be something the matter with his brain, and that there was no dog there after all. But when he looked again, there he was, plain as ever. "I will take that brute outside of camp and kill him when I get a chance," he thought. That evening, when they made camp at a small water hole, Judson walked away out of sight and hearing of the camp. When he could no longer be seen, he turned, and aiming his pistol at the dog, pulled the trigger. The bull had hit the ground between the animal's legs, and he ran back a few paces and stood grinning at Judson, showing his teeth, and his face looked like that of his old partner. Judson picked up a large rock and ran at the dog. The animal yelped slightly and started for camp. Judson increased his pace, and the dog circled out into the desert. "Curse you!" cried Judson. "I'll kill you yet!" Several times he threw stones at the animal, and twice he fell, bruising himself among the loose rocks. At last he sat down. "What's the matter with you?" shouted Stevens. "What are you running about and shouting in that way for?" "That confounded dog of mine," answered Judson unthinkingly. "Nonsense, man, there isn't any dog." Judson walked slowly back to camp, followed closely by the dog. The men looked at him strangely. That night when he went to sleep, the brute came and laid down beside him. A horrid fear took possession of him, and he pushed the thing away, but it immediately crawled back again. At last he arose and spent the rest of the night walking up and down the desert, the dog following close at his heels. When they arrived in Phoenix, the doctor advised Judson to go to a quiet place and rest, and gave him an opiate. "Why don't he go back and get the gold?" asked the Eastern man. "'Cause as I told you, whenever he starts to go back, the dog meets him on the desert, and he is only free from it when he stays in Phoenix. He says the dog is his old partner and will never let him go back there again. That is why he is willing to sell his secret." "But how do you know, if we pay him his money," asked the Eastern man, "that we can find the gold?" "Why, his map and directions together with the photographs ought to make it sure. Anyway, I'm putting up $250 of my money with your $350 and run as much risk as you do. Besides, you never would have known about it hadn't it been for me." "Won't he take less than $600?" asked the Eastern man. "Not a cent. I've tried him too often. If I had $600 of my own, I never would have asked any one of you to go with me. It's a snap." We found Judson seated in a big armchair, smoking a meerschaum pipe. His eyes had a peculiar wild expression, and he glared at us as we entered. "What do you people want?" he asked. "We've come to buy your claim," said the prospector. Judson laughed a strange, hard laugh. "Always the same. Gold, gold, gold. Have you the money with you to pay for it?" he asked. The prospector produced a bag of $20 gold pieces and shook it. "Here it is," he said. "This gentleman and myself have made up the amount, $600. "Well," shouted Judson, "give me the money and take the cursed claim, buried gold and all, and much good may it do for you. I will go away, far away from here. My God, to think that I should sell a rich claim like that for nothing. But I wouldn't go back to it for all the gold in the world. 3 times I've tried, and each time that dog devil met me at the edge of the desert, grinning at me with the face of my dead partner. Here are the photographs and the map. Take them and go. My head aches. Go away and leave me." He buried his face in his hands, groaning and muttering to himself. The prospector put the bag of gold on the table, and taking the photographs and map, left the room. We followed him, closely, the door softly behind us. "Did you find the gold?" I asked. "I didn't look for it," answered the drummer. "They offered to let me in and give me a third interest for $300, but somehow I didn't like the idea, and the whole thing seemed uncanny, and it is lucky I didn't." The prospector and the Eastern man got back a week later without having discovered the Mound of Eternal Silence, both mad as hatters, and each laying the blame of the failure on the other. I have always wondered since if Judson was really as crazy as they thought he was. "Why?" I asked. "What made you doubt it?" "Oh," answered the drummer, "I can't exactly say I disbelieve his story, but, well, you see, about a month afterwards I was in Phoenix again, and one night I saw the prospector and the lunatic taking a drink at a bar together. A little later the prospector passed me without seeing me. He was walking arm in arm with a stranger, and as they went by I heard him say, 'If I had the money, I never would think of asking anyone to go in with me.' He calls it the Mound of Eternal Silence." They passed on, and their voices were lost to me in the distance. End of The Mound of Eternal Silence. Recording by Ginger Kukalo, Washington, D.C. Section 9 of Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ginger Kukalo. Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales by Charles B. Cory. Story of a Bad Indian. Melita was a half-breed, the daughter of an old squaw man. She had spent several years at the Indian school in Phoenix and had proved herself an apt pupil. Later she went to work on Simmons Ranch. She was a very pretty, healthy-looking girl, and one day Morgan Jones, the hunter and trapper, asked her to marry him. She went with him to his cabin near the reservation and settled down. Jones was a devil-may-care sort of chap who, when he had a little money, came to the straggling one-horse town near the reservation, drank considerable whiskey, and amused himself by running his pony up and down the one street, firing off his gun, and shouting at the top of his voice. This was Jones's idea of a good time, and his method of contributing his share to the sanguinary ornamentation of the embryo metropolis. Melita made Jones a good wife, and attended to his creature comforts to the best of her ability, and when Jones returned to the cabin in an inebriated condition, she soothed him, and put him to bed, looking upon such incidents as a matter of course. For a year or more they lived contentedly, and a little boy was born to them. On the reservation lived an Indian named Tixinopa, a splendid specimen of a savage athlete, and the most noted runner and hunter in his tribe. Like many of his race, while hating the white man, he loved the white man's firewater, and it made him surly and quarrelsome. He was a natural leader, and often at night he spoke with fiery eloquence of the wrongs of his race, sowing the seeds of unrest and rebellion. Tixinopa was the only cloud which disturbed the domestic horizon of the Jones family. He haunted the vicinity of the cabin, and was continually asking Melita for whiskey and tobacco when Jones was away, until at last Jones intimated to him gently that his presence was, to say the least, undesirable. Being a child of the woods and hills, he did not have at his command a large vocabulary of diplomatic phrases to enable him to do this politely. In fact, he was blunt. In describing the interview to Melita afterwards, he said, "I told him if he come around here any more I'd smash his head, and he grunts and draws himself up this way, and looks ugly and says, 'He's a big Injun, and I told him to go to hell.'" For some time Tixinopa kept away from the cabin, but one day he appeared and demanded whiskey. He was half drunk, and his bloodshot eyes blinked at Melita as he swayed unsteadily in the doorway. "No, Tixinopa, there is no whiskey." Tixinopa's eyes grew ugly. "You lie, you half-breed squaw. But be it so. I will take the boy away until you remember where it is." So saying, he lifted the baby by the arm and swung him onto his shoulder. The child cried out with pain from his twisted arm. Melita's heart sunk with a dreadful fear. "Give the child to me, Tixinopa. Do not be rough. See, you have hurt him." She tried to take the boy, but Tixinopa pushed her away roughly, and she fell to the ground. Up she sprang and threw herself upon him, trying to get the boy, and in the struggle she scratched his face slightly, so that blood came. With a curse he struck her full in the face with his clenched fist, and she fell as if dead, and lay with her hands twitching feebly. "Take your half-breed brat," he hissed, throwing the baby roughly on the ground beside her. He turned to walk away, but something in the motionless form of the child caused him to look again, and he saw that his little head lay doubled under his arm in a way that could only mean one thing: a broken neck. Melita rose unsteadily to her feet and looked about in a dazed way until her gaze rested upon the little body of her dead baby. The next instant she was striking and cutting at Tixinopa, screaming like a mad thing. The attack was so sudden and fierce that, trained athlete and fighter as he was, Tixinopa received a deep cut on the shoulder and a slight one on the arm before he succeeded in grasping her wrist and twisting the knife from her. Then, seizing her by the hair, he drew her to him and drove the knife twice into her breast, throwing her to the ground, where she lay gasping her life away in broken sobs. Tixinopa stood for a moment looking at Melita, and was quite still. His arm pained him, and he held up his hand and watched the blood dripping from his fingers. Then he took a self-cocking revolver from his belt and fired shot after shot into the bodies of the dead baby and the dying mother. Twice the hammer clicked on an empty shell before he ceased to pull the trigger, and he slowly turned away, pushing his empty pistol into his belt. As he did so, he found himself face to face with Jones, but a different Jones than the one he had known. This Jones's face was white and drawn, and looked years older than the other Jones. The hand which held a pistol pointed at him shook unsteadily. A minute, perhaps 2 minutes passed, and still the two men faced each other. Then an evil light came into Tixinopa's eyes, and his hand slid slowly towards the handle of his knife, to be instantly smashed by a bullet from Jones's pistol. Another shot, and the other arm was broken at the elbow. Neither man had spoken, but now Tixinopa began a low, wild chant. Raised to his full height, with his broken arms hanging by his sides, he chanted the death song of his people, the same song which had been sung by his father and his father's father, and for generations past by all dying warriors of his tribe. "Tixinopa," the voice was a husky whisper, "for her sake I won't torture yer as I would like ter. God give me strength to keep from doing it. But I'm afeard He won't unless I kill her quick. All I hope is that if there is a hell, your black soul will roast in it for ever and ever. Amen." The muzzle of the pistol was now within a few inches of the naked breast. Still the low, wild chant went on, the bronze figure standing as if turned to stone. Then another shot, and the chant stopped. 10 minutes later, a horseman rode slowly into the desert. To his left, as he crossed the half-dry bed of the alkali stream, 2 Indian boys were skinning a rabbit alive and laughing at its agony. From afar back on the other side of the valley he heard the strains of the Star-Spangled Banner, played by the pride of the reservation, the Indian Band. End of Story of a Bad Indian. Recording by Ginger Kukalo, Washington, D.C. Section 10 of Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ginger Kukalo. Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales by Charles B. Cory. A Queer Coincidence. "You say," said Dr. Watson, as he rested one arm on the mantel and looked thoughtfully at the open fire, "you say there is no proof of the actuality of what is called telepathy or thought transference. And perhaps you are right, but I have several times in my life had experiences which were very difficult to explain except by some such theory, and if you care to listen I will tell you one of them which I have in mind." Our chorus of approval evidently left no doubt as to our desire to hear the story, for Watson smiled, and lighting a fresh cigar he began as follows. "On the 17th of January last year there was a slight washout on the northern road not far from Chicago, and the forward trucks of one of the cars on train 61, on which I was a passenger, left the rails, but luckily the train was going slowly at the time, and there was little damage done except a general shaking up of the passengers in the car, as the forward wheels bumped roughly over the sleepers for a few yards before the train stopped. The other cars did not leave the track, and only one man was seriously injured. This man had been standing on the platform at the time, and was thrown between the cars and badly crushed. I was close to the end window and saw him fall, and when the conductor called for a doctor, I responded at once. I found the man lying on a blanket surrounded by a number of the passengers. He seemed to suffer but little pain, and I feared, from a casual examination, he was badly injured internally. Although he was perfectly conscious, he was bleeding at the mouth, and his legs seemed to be paralyzed. He asked faintly if I thought he was going to die, and I cheered him up as is customary in such cases, but shortly afterwards he developed such serious symptoms that I felt forced to tell him I feared he was seriously hurt, and it was quite possible he would live but a few hours. Upon hearing this, he became very much agitated, and whispered to me that he wished to speak to me alone, saying he had something of the utmost importance to communicate. I thought it was probably some message to send to some members of his family, or some instructions regarding his affairs, but after a few words I became very much interested. He talked for 15 minutes, part of the time being sustained by the use of stimulants. His story, which was a very strange one, I will repeat as nearly as possible in his own words. After repeatedly asking me to assure him there was no possible chance of his recovery, he said, "It is not necessary for you to know my name, but it is sufficient for me to tell you that I received a good education in my youth and graduated with high honors at one of the large universities in this country. I always had more or less interest in the study of physiology, and during my college course conducted a series of experiments in hypnotism, and made some interesting discoveries regarding the exaltation of the senses, and especially in relation to illusion and hallucination, by the aid of post-hypnotic suggestion. It had been my earnest desire to occupy the position of professor of physiology in one of the universities, but failing to attain a position of this kind, and having no means of support, I gradually became poorer and poorer, earning a livelihood as best I could, until I became discouraged and attempted to make money in a way not quite so honest. The idea suggested itself to me during a series of experiments which I had conducted with a friend of mine. It so happened that this friend was paying teller in one of our well-known banks of Chicago, where he is today. He is a thoroughly honorable man in every way, but I found that he was a good hypnotic subject, or sensitive, as we call it. At first he could not be considered first class, but he was much interested in the subject, and allowed me to hypnotize him repeatedly. After a few evenings he became very easily influenced, and one of the best subjects I had ever had. I could put him to sleep in a moment, simply snapping my fingers and telling him I wished him to sleep. Of course, this can only be done with sensitives who had been repeatedly hypnotized. Under these conditions I succeeded in making him do very many wonderful things, especially in the way of post-hypnotic suggestions. A post-hypnotic suggestion is a command given to hypnotized subjects that at some future time they perform a certain act. In most cases, in waking from the hypnotic sleep, they have forgotten that the suggestion has been given them, but at the time set they perform the act unconsciously, as though by their own volition. Not only will they do this, but after the act is performed they usually sink into a quiet sleep, from which they awake after passing into the normal sleep, and, as a rule, have forgotten that they did anything unusual, or that they have been hypnotized, and take up the thread of thought again at the point where they first entered the hypnotic condition. They do not remember what they have done or seen. Their mind is a blank as to all that occurred during the time they were hypnotized. For the last 2 years I have been rather fortunate, in a small way, speculating in stocks. My capital being small, the amount of money I could make was, of course, comparatively little, yet I succeeded in doing very well until about 3 weeks ago, when by 2 or 3 unfortunate speculations I found myself absolutely destitute, and without a penny in the world. It was then that the idea suggested itself to me to hypnotize Mr. Herrick and make him bring me money from the bank. This, of course, was perfectly possible, if no accident occurred, or no unforeseen difficulty presented itself, which I had not previously thought of, as the cashier would act simply as an instrument, being governed entirely by directions. I asked him in a casual way several times about the affairs of the bank, and learned one day that the bank would have an unusually large balance in settling with the clearing house. It was the custom of Mr. Herrick to lock up his own funds, and simply state to the cashier that he had done so. According to a carefully arranged plan, I hypnotized him last evening, and commanded him to take all the money and securities he had in his possession, after settling with the clearing house, and instead of locking them in his vault, to put them in a bag, of course taking precautions to do this when no one was observing him, and then leave the bank in the usual manner. He was to take a carriage and drive directly to a small, unoccupied house which is situated on the corner of Blank and 117th Streets. It was my intention, as I had gone so far, to go still further. I knew that Mr. Herrick would bring me the money and securities, and that I should find him asleep in the house. But what I did not know positively, and what I feared was, that he might not forget what he had done when he awoke. As a rule, sensitives obey the command to forget, but in the course of my various experiments I have found sensitives who had a vague idea of what occurred. Perhaps nothing tangible, but still sufficient in a case like this, when there would be a great row about the lost securities, to suggest a possible clue. It was a very cold day, 6 degrees below, I think, and I deliberately intended to leave Mr. Herrick asleep after I had taken the money from him, and let him take his chances, sleeping without any fire or covering, in a hypnotic condition, with the temperatures below zero, and you can judge what his chances would have been. This scheme I thought out deliberately, and what seemed strange, I had not the least repugnance against arranging for the death of my friend. After I had once made up my mind to make him steal the securities, his disappearance seemed to be the only way to ensure my safety. Of course, no one could know I was connected with this matter. I would not go near the bank, and unless he was followed, which was most unlikely, as he had been with the bank some years and was a thoroughly trusted official, there would be absolutely no chance of my detection. Watson relighted his cigar, which had gone out, and continued. While he had been speaking, another train had arrived with a lot of workmen who were busily engaged jacking the car back on the rails. The train was about to return to Chicago, so I inquired the name of the bank and its president, and the address of the house, writing them down so there could be no possible mistake. I then hastened on board the train, leaving my patient under the care of Dr. Morse, a local physician, who agreed to notify me as to the condition of the man later in the day. Upon arriving in Chicago, I immediately drove to the bank, but found it closed. I was told, however, that Mr. Bartlett, the president, was attending a corporation meeting in an office in the same building. I immediately hunted him up, and upon hearing my story, he hastily ordered a carriage, and we drove to the house as described. On our way out, we stopped and picked up Dr. Marsh, who, as you know, is very much interested in such matters. It was quite a long drive, but we found the place without difficulty. It was unoccupied, and most of the windows were broken, and altogether it presented a very dilapidated appearance, such as the cheap houses on the outskirts of a great city often do, after having been unoccupied for a year or two. We tried the door and found it unlocked. On the first floor the rooms were entirely empty, loose papers scattered about, and no signs of any one having entered the house. Upon going upstairs, we found the door on the first landing at the head of the stairs closed, but not locked. At the back of the room was a cracked wooden stool and a dilapidated hair sofa, which had evidently been considered too used up to be of any value. Part of the cover was torn away, one of the legs broken, and some of the hair stuffing was lying scattered about the floor. On this lounge lay Mr. Herrick, apparently sound asleep, his lips blue with cold, his face pale, and the general appearance of a man half frozen to death. He was breathing very quietly, however, and his heart action was still fairly good, although somewhat slow. By his side lay a small bag, which, it's needless to say, was pounced upon by Mr. Bartlett. It contained some valuable securities and a great bundle of bank bills of large denomination. Both Marsh and I considered Herrick's condition as decidedly interesting and unusual, and we were both of the opinion that, as part of the story had been proved true, it was very likely the whole would turn out just as described. If this proved to be the case, all that now remained to be done was to restore Herrick to his normal condition, which might or might not be easy to accomplish. The first thing to be done was to get him out of such a low temperature. We tried various methods of restoring consciousness, but without success. What we did not like was that his heart action was gradually becoming weaker. We gave a hypodermic injection of strychnia, and the heart was soon acting in a much more satisfactory manner. There was no return to consciousness, however, so taking him in the carriage, we drove back to Dr. Marsh's house, and arriving there we all turned to and did what we could to restore Herrick to consciousness. Now that he was in a warm room, the drawn expression and the blue look left his face, but otherwise he appeared to sleep as soundly as ever. The heart was now acting very well, and aside from the coma, the condition of the patient gave us no cause for anxiety. As time went on, however, and we absolutely failed to waken him, and the heart again showed signs of weakness, we began to feel somewhat uneasy. "You see," said Watson, "we did not know what suggestion was given the patient. These post-hypnotic suggestions are peculiar in their action upon some sensitives. If, as it is fair to suppose, this man was ordered to sleep, he should, in the natural course of events, sleep for a number of hours and then awake, after passing from the hypnotic sleep to the normal sleep, but we know very little of the effect on some nervous systems of post-hypnotic suggestions. Another thing, in many cases, the patient will not waken or cannot be wakened except by the person who put him to sleep. The reason for this is plain enough. Part of the effect on the mind of hypnotic suggestion is due entirely to sleep. The skilled hypnotist commands one of his sensitives to sleep under certain conditions. The sensitive expects to be awakened by the same voice and in the same way, and habit and association have fixed in his mind certain conditions which he associates with the order to awake. There is no doubt whatever that Mr. Herrick heard what we were saying when we spoke to him in a loud voice, but he heard it without understanding, much as a person in a sleepy condition hears noises about him without trying to comprehend them. It is undoubtedly true that the man who put Herrick to sleep could have awakened him in a moment, while we, with all our knowledge and experience, were unable to make his brain regain its normal condition. We decided to let him sleep, and if at the end of a few hours he did not regain consciousness, we would try again what we could do to assist him, of course watching the heart in the meanwhile and using nitroglycerin or strychnia if indicated. At that moment Herrick suddenly spoke, at first huskily, and then in a loud, clear voice, shouting, "Yes, yes, I hear you. I am awake." Then he sat up, asking in a dazed way, "Where am I? What does this mean?" As he did so, the old-fashioned clock in the hall struck the hour of 7. The queerest part of this story is suggested by a letter received from Dr. Morse the next day, which read as follows: "Dear Watson, you asked me to write you about the injured man, and I do so now to tell you he is dead. He died a minute or two before 7 o'clock last evening. I know the hour exactly because I was watching him at the time, and for some moments he had been whispering and muttering to himself, but all I could catch was something about 'I withdraw my command,' when suddenly raising himself, he shouted, 'Wake up! Wake up!' and fell back dead just as the clock in the churchyard struck 7. I should be much interested to hear whether his story was true or not. Drop me a line about it when you have time. Very sincerely yours, F. Morse." End of section 10. Recording by Ginger Kukalo, Washington, D.C.
Section 11 of Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales by Charles B. Cory. The Story of an Insane Sailor. "That pocket piece of yours," said the doctor, "reminds me that I have an interesting one of my own. Perhaps you can tell me what it is." He took from his pocket a silver coin and handed it to Jennings as he spoke. One edge had been flattened and a hole pierced in it. "Ah, an old Spanish piece," said Jennings, "evidently of the time of Pope Leo IV, sometime in the 16th century. A very interesting piece. Where did you get it?" "Well, there's a curious story connected with that coin," meditatively remarked Dr. Watson. "Perhaps you'd like to hear it." We had been dining with Watson, and were now comfortably seated in the library before an old-fashioned open fire. It was snowing outside, making the warm, bright study all the more cheerful by contrast. "Perhaps you remember," said Watson, "that during the winter of 1886 I devoted very much more of my time than usual to the insane asylum. I was very much interested in testing the value of hypnotism for insane patients, especially mild cases and those having illusions and insistent ideas. I had been quite successful in one case, a woman who had tried to starve herself to death, under the impression that the devil commanded her not to eat, was greatly benefited by post-hypnotic suggestion. Suggesting that the devil would not come any more induced pronounced hysteria. But when hypnotized and told that the devil commanded her to eat, instead of to abstain from food, she took nourishment readily, and soon developed an extraordinary appetite. An immediate improvement in her condition was noticeable, and as her general body health improved, the illusions became less and less frequent, and she was discharged from the asylum as cured in less than 3 months. Watson paused and gazed meditatively at the end of his cigar. Ever tried to hypnotize an insane person, Jennings? Not that I remember. You, Morris? Can't say that I have. Well, sometimes you succeed, and sometimes you don't. More often you don't. There was one patient, a man by the name of Allen, who had been a sailor. He was subject to fits of extreme melancholia, and at times was positively dangerous, as he imagined someone was trying to poison him. I never succeeded in hypnotizing him, although I tried repeatedly. However, I saw him every day, and as his general health improved, his attacks of melancholia became less frequent. He seemed grateful to me for taking an interest in him, and often talked with me about his early life and the out-of-the-way countries that he had visited. Shortly after, I was called away, and did not return to the asylum for 2 weeks, and when I did go back, I found that Allen was dead. He had cut his throat one afternoon with a large pocket-knife, and made a mighty clean job of it, too. Well, continued the doctor, among his effects they found a package addressed to me, which contained a letter and a silver coin. The coin you now hold in your hand. The letter I have here in my desk. He opened a drawer and took out a large yellow envelope containing a number of pages of closely written manuscript. This letter, said Watson, as he slowly turned over the pages, contains a story so strange that I did not for a moment believe it had any foundation in fact. But during the past year or two I have learned certain things which have caused me to change my opinion. Whether the story is true or not, we will of course never know, but I now believe that it is a true record of events which actually happened. I have made some inquiries and found that the places mentioned do exist, or did at the time the story was written. But never mind. I will read you the letter, and you can form your own conclusions. Dr. S. T. Watson, dear sir, I've made up my mind to kill myself, but before I die, I wish to make a confession of my wrongdoings, as he insists that I shall, and I dare not disobey him. I therefore write this confession to be read by you after I am dead. You tell me I imagine, I hear the voice, and see the man. I tell you, doctor, you who think me crazy are the one who is deceived. You do not believe in telepathy and thought transference, and yet I could tell many times when you looked at me of what you were thinking. I tell you that I hear Jim's voice as plainly as ever I heard yours, and he talks to me and tells me that he will never leave me while I live, and then he laughs. Oh, that laugh! He comes often at night and wakes me out of a sound sleep with that awful laugh, and then he whispers to me to go to sleep again. Of course you do not believe in spirits or ghosts, and you believe I am crazy, and that the half-invisible form of my dead partner, which comes to me and talks to me, and whose voice I hear as plainly as I ever heard yours, exists wholly in my imagination. Well, doctor, you have been kind to me, and I hope and pray you will never suffer the way I have suffered during the past 3 years. Just 3 years ago today I was on board the Ada Gray, a small schooner off the coast of Florida, bound for the Isthmus. There were 7 of us in all, including the captain and mate, the latter an old pal of mine who had arranged to get me in as one of the crew. In some way he had learned that the captain was to take with him some 2,000 in gold, and although we had no plans, we intended to get the gold in some way. On our way down we had talked over many schemes, but none of them seemed satisfactory. The gold was kept in a small fireproof safe in the captain's cabin, but it was an old-fashioned key-lock affair, and we didn't anticipate much trouble from that quarter, even if we could not find the key. The great point was, how were we to get the money and get away? At last we decided to drug the men's coffee, and when they were sleeping from its effects, we would take the money and leave in the schooner's yawl, in which, as the weather was very calm and the Florida coast could be seen in the distance, we should have no difficulty in making the shore. Jim had overhauled the medicine chest and found a vial containing a lot of morphine pills marked 1/8 grain, and as neither he nor I knew just how much morphine it took to drug a man, he watched his opportunity and emptied the contents of the vial into the coffee. After supper we kept on deck for some time, waiting results. At last Jim went forward and reported everything was quiet, the men apparently all asleep. We found the captain in his cabin, lying on his bunk, breathing heavily. The key to the safe was in the captain's pocket, and we opened it without difficulty. There were 6 rolls of $20 pieces marked $200 each, 8 rolls of $10 pieces, and a bag of silver. We took the money and some other things we found in the cabin, including a pair of revolvers, a double-barreled shotgun, and a rifle, and put them in the boat, together with a small keg of water, tinned meat, and a bag of ship biscuit. After these were carefully stowed away at the yawl, Jim went back to the cabin, while I busied myself arranging things in the boat. He soon came on deck again, bringing several bottles of brandy, and coming to the side of the schooner, reached them one by one to me over the side. As he handed me the last bottle, I saw the burly form of our negro cook rise slowly out of the hatchway, rubbing his eyes as if half asleep. Jim saw my stare of surprise, and turning quickly, faced the negro, who was looking at us with a dazed expression. He could not have drunk of the coffee, for I have learned since that the amount of morphine Jim put in the pot was more than enough to kill the entire crew. Jim turned, and walking slowly up to the man, said hoarsely, "Go down," at the same time pointing to the hatchway. "What for?" said the negro, moving a step backward. "None of your business what for. Go down, I tell you." "I don't take no orders from you nohow," answered the man. "Where's the captain?" Without a word Jim struck him full in the face with all his strength. The blow was an awful one, and the negro staggered back and would have fallen had not he brought up against the foremast. He roared with rage and came at Jim with a rush like a mad bull. Jim bent sideways, and something flashed in his hand as he struck upward under the man's arm. Instantly the negro stumbled forward and fell on the deck, and then sat up and began to cough. He coughed incessantly, like a man who had swallowed something which choked him. Jim looked at him a moment, and then, without a word, cast off the painter and jumped into the boat. There was not a breath of wind, so we each took an oar and pulled toward the faint line of land just visible in the western horizon. The schooner lay almost motionless, with the silence of death about her. The negro had stopped coughing, and all was still, save the faint creaking of the masts and spars, and the sounds of our oars in the rowlocks. In the west, the sun-painted clouds lay in great masses of gold and purple, tinting the sea with ever-changing colors. "Damn pretty sunset," remarked Jim, as he drew in his oar and bent over to light his pipe, and then musingly, "I wish I hadn't had to kill that nigger." Shortly after dark a gentle breeze sprung up from the southeast, and we put up a little sail we had brought with us. Fowley Rock's light was in plain sight, and about midnight we rounded Cape Florida and entered Biscayne Bay, and by daylight we made the mouth of the Miami River, where we tied up to a small pier opened by a man named Brickle. On the other side of the river stood a long, low stone building, which they told us was once used as a government building and was called Fort Dallas. We told the people we had come from Key West, following the coast along inside the Keys, and were on a hunting and fishing trip. Upon inquiry we learned that there was very little game about the bay except crocodiles, but that we could get splendid sport by going up the river into the Everglades and following the shoreline north to New River. They advised us to get an Indian to go with us. This plan suited us exactly, as once having disappeared into the wilderness, we would come out at some other point, and having assumed new names, could go forth into the world in perfect safety. Before starting, we bought a light, flat-bottomed boat for use in shallow water, and after rowing up the river a few miles, we made camp and burned the yawl, first breaking her up with our axes. This took up the greater part of the day. In the afternoon Jim went up to the head of the river and reported meeting an Indian who told him of a large island which was, as near as he could judge, about 30 miles to the north, on which there were deer and turkeys. We had plenty of provisions, and for 3 days we pushed our boat northward among the islands of the great grassy lake. In many places the water was so shallow we had to push our way through grass and reeds. We noticed a great many white flowers growing on the banks of the islands, and water lilies were abundant, but they had no smell. Towards evening on the 3rd day we landed on a large island on which there was a high mound. Hundreds of white herons and various other birds were nesting in the trees, and there were a good many ducks about. We shot some of the herons and cut off the long hair-like plumes, but the flesh was strong and unpalatable. The ducks, however, were very good. We camped on the mound, which was much higher than the rest of the island, and decided to stay there for a day or two. While putting up the tent, I saw something shine, and picked up a silver coin, which had evidently been worn as a medal, as one edge had been flattened and the hole pierced in it. There was no date, but it was evidently very old. That day we tried fishing, and shot several ducks. We had but one shotgun, so we took turns with it at the ducks. That evening Jim produced an old pack of cards from his pocket and suggested a game of poker. My luck went against me from the beginning, and when we stopped playing I had lost fully 2/3 of my share. The next morning I awoke feeling remorseful and sulky, and demanded that Jim play another game to give me a chance to get even. He assented readily enough, but my bad luck continued, and in an hour I had lost all of my money and had nothing left to bet. Jim got up, taking the gun, and went down to the boat to repair a leak which had bothered us the day before. I sat on a log, inwardly raging and cursing myself for my foolishness. The rifle was leaning against the log near me, and involuntarily I took it and dropped the lever to see if it was loaded. It was empty, and the hammer moved back and forth at the touch of my finger. Evidently the spring was broken. But how? Why? I felt in my pocket for my revolver with feverish haste. It was gone. Then I understood. I rose and walked slowly down the slope of the mound, and nearly stepped on a large rattlesnake which had lay coiled up beside a palmetto root. I looked at the snake, and as he lay there watching me, rattling angrily all the while, and then I looked at Jim's coat, which hung on a branch near by, and at the doctored rifle in my hand, and the more I looked, the more wicked thoughts came into my mind. I glanced toward Jim. He was apparently very busy with the boat, and I could just see the top of his back as he bent over. I hastily fastened one of the dead herons to a stick, and held it in front of the snake, which immediately struck it in the breast, and then uncoiled and slowly retreated into the scrub. Taking 2 pins from my coat, I inserted them into the holes made by the fangs of the rattlesnake, and took them out, covered with blood and poison. In a few minutes this dried, and I then fastened the pins inside the arm of Jim's coat in such a way that his hand would be scratched when he put it on. This done, I hung the coat back on the branch and walked off a little way, but feeling more than half inclined to go back and take the pins out again while there was yet still time. Perhaps Jim didn't mean to kill me, but simply wished to protect himself against treachery on my part. But then I remember the Negro and the morphine, and, well, dead men tell no tales. As I turned to go back, I saw Jim in the act of taking down his coat, and I felt a queer, choky sensation in my throat and a sort of half-catch to my breath as he pushed his arm through the sleeve, at the same time putting the back of his hand to his lips in a way that can only have one meaning. I watched him with an ugly feeling of satisfaction, wondering how long it would take for the poison to begin to take effect. Jim put a couple of sticks on the fire, and then sat down on a log and commenced to fill his pipe, but soon laid it down. "Curse it," he said, "I feel queer." He got up and walked up and down, rubbing his arm. He looked at me in an odd sort of a way once or twice, and then went into the tent and lay down. Shortly after, he called to me, and on my going to the door of the tent he tried to rise, but fell back and became delirious, laughing and shouting my name and muttering to himself. He breathed with difficulty, and in a little while he became unconscious, and just as the sun was sinking over the faint line of trees in the west, he died. I took down the tent and dug a hole and buried him where he lay. I built a huge fire and sat by it all night without closing my eyes. Towards morning the moon came up, and the sounds of the night noises ceased. And as soon as it was light, I put the gold and what things I needed in the boat and made haste to leave the island. I paddled for 2 or 3 hours before I noticed that the sun, which had been to my right when I started, was at my left, and I knew that I must have turned the boat around. I turned about and paddled on steadily all day long, but night found me with no signs of dry land anywhere, nothing but an unending stretch of grass and water just as far as the eye could reach. When it grew dark, I lay down in the bottom of the boat and tried to sleep, but as soon as I closed my eyes I felt cold all over, a creepy sort of a cold, and heard voices whispering. At first I told myself they were not voices. 'Twas a trick of my imagination, the wind, perhaps, or the rustle of the grass about me. But then I heard Jim's voice. There could be no mistaking his horrid, sneering laugh. It made me afraid. But do what I would, I could not help hearing it. I stopped my ears and wrapped my head in my coat. But still, from time to time, I could hear the voices whispering and Jim's laugh, and at times I felt cold. The next day I poled and paddled until late in the afternoon. I felt very hot, and my head ached as though it would split. I had a pain in the back of my neck, and drank a great deal of water. I knew I had some sort of a fever, but having no medicine I could do nothing but push on, hoping to find my way to dry land. All that day I continually heard Jim's voice laughing at me, and the next I knew I found myself in an Indian camp, and was told that I had been found in the boat sick. The gold was gone. The Indians claimed it was not in the boat. One of them seemed to be a chief, and wore a big turban on his head with a silver band around it. They told me his name was Tom Tiger. And now, Doctor, goodbye. Jim is whispering to me again, and telling me it is time. In 5 minutes after I sign this, I shall be dead. I shall make no mistake. My knife is very sharp. John Allen. End of section 11. Section 12 of Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales by Charles B. Cory. The Elixir of Life. "Behold," said Dr. Watson, "the elixir of life." Robinson looked up from his writing and assumed an expression of deep interest. "Wonderful! I've often heard of it. Is it the true elixir vitae of the ancients, or a new and more subtle compound? Listen, scoffer. If you'll behave with a decorum consistent with the gravity of the subject, I will explain how I became the possessor of this wonderful powder. Perhaps in your life of seclusion and deep toil you may not have noticed this advertisement, which has appeared for the last month regularly in the morning paper." Watson took from his pocketbook a newspaper clipping and read as follows: "Methuselah Club. The object of this club is to enable its members to live to be 150 years old. All persons desiring to become members should apply for particulars to Rengi Singh, No. 5, 27th Street, City." "Are you a member?" inquired Robinson. "Not as yet, but Jones is, and it was through Jones that I came into possession of this mysterious drug. It seems that Jones decided, after reading the advertisement, that he'd like to become a member of the club. Jones's health is not very good, as you know, and he called on Rengee Sing, and the result of the interview was that he came away with this small vial of the wonderful elixir, for which he paid $20 good. He was so impressed by the gentleman who sold him the powder that he came to me as his medical adviser to ask my opinion as to the advisability of taking some of it. He brought with him a paper purporting to be the translation of an ancient papyrus manuscript, the original of which was in Thibetian or Sanskrit, and which was ingenious, if fraudulent. He told me a rambling story of how this Rengee Sing had procured this powder, and the whole thing was so peculiar that I decided to interview the gentleman myself. But first I made a point of getting our friend Strauss to analyze the powder. His report of the analysis shows it to be composed entirely of chloride of sodium, or plain common salt, with a small quantity of some unknown vegetable matter, which gives it a yellow color. Armed with this information, I called upon Rengee Sing at his office on 27th Street. "You interest me," said Robinson, glancing at his work and palpably attempting to suppress a yawn. Watson arose and gently but firmly removed the pen from Robinson's fingers. He then placed the book on the papers and continued. The office was distinctly oriental, and there were numerous Bukhara and other good rugs scattered about. Besides, there were gorgeous divans, and the air was heavy with peculiar Eastern odors. I was admitted by a gigantic negro dressed in Oriental costume, and another negro arose as I entered and stood respectfully at the inner door. I asked for Rengee Sing, and was informed that he would be at liberty in a few moments, and would I sit down and wait, all in very good English, from one of the gigantic sable guardians who bowed me in. I was kept waiting but just a few moments, when the door opened and a small black-bearded Hindu came softly into the room, dressed in ordinary European costume. There was nothing striking about him except his eyes, which were really the most wonderful eyes I have ever seen on a human being. With a gentle manner peculiar to his race, he smiled and asked me to take a seat near the window. "Is it possible," said Robinson, languidly lighting a cigarette. "Is what possible?" inquired Watson, frowning slightly. "Why, that he asked you to take a seat near the window." "Robinson," remarked Watson sternly, "remember that your mental infirmities will not prevent my punching your head if you interrupt me with any more foolish questions." Robinson grinned, and after ostentatiously placing a paper-weight within easy reach, Watson continued. "I inquired if he was the person to whom I should apply for information about the Methuselah Club. He answered that he had the honor of being the president of the club, and would be glad to supply me with all the information in his power. Did I wish to join? "Well, a friend of mine," I said, "has already become a member, and the description of a wonderful powder has interested me. Likewise the history of the powder." The Hindu smiled gently, showing his white teeth, and said that he was not surprised at my curiosity. He then went to a desk and took from it the printed circular, which Jones had already shown me, and which was supposed to be a translation of the ancient manuscript. It is the one I hold in my hand. Please glance over it before I continue my story. Robinson took the paper. "What is this hieroglyphic affair at the top here?" he asked. "That," said Watson, "is probably a copy of some very ancient amulet or talisman. The fish at the bottom was often used to designate Dag, or the Master. Next above we have the Solomon's seal, and then the 4 Chaldaic letters, Jod, He, Van, He, Io, which is the deity. The other symbols are strange to me." "Ah," said Robinson, "a weird sort of thing, is it not? Don't be sarcastic. Read it. sententiously remarked Watson. Robinson did so. "Let him who dares to live forever take of the powder, but let him think of but speak it not on pain of death. Let absolute mukta be known to him. Let him study the secret mantras, and ponder on the mysteries of Vach. Let him also say each day in his prayer, Na Bad Mi Hum. He who takes of the powder 3 times should acquaint himself with the Marka and the Lagash, and then he will never die. Even though he wished to live 1,000 years, so it shall be." "Well," remarked Watson, "what do you think of it?" "Fake," answered Robinson. "Verily, out of the mouths of babes, etc.," said Watson. "But, old learned friend, you have not heard the whole story. Listen. I asked Renji Singh if he would be good enough to explain to me fully about the powder, and especially how and where he obtained it. 'My dear sir,' he said, 'I see you are a scientific man, and it always gives me great pleasure to meet such, and to explain to them as fully as possible how I, Renji Singh, obtained possession of one of the most valuable treasures in the world, the elixir of life. But before doing so, I must enroll your name among the members of our society. In fact, one of the rules of the society is that unless a person becomes a member, we can tell him nothing, beyond allowing him to read the circular which you have already seen. The initiation fee is $5, and you are at liberty not to take the powder if you desire not to do so after you have become a member. But if you wish to become a member in high standing, and to take the powder, which will ensure you a length of life far beyond that of ordinary mortals, an additional fee of $20 is charged for the powder. I decided," continued Watson, "that the experience was worth $5, so I intimated that I should be delighted to become a member of the society, and handed Mr. Singh $5, whereupon he wrote me a receipt and gave me a member's card, which stated that I was a member of the Methuselah Club of the 2nd class, and entitled to receive the elixir and to become a member of the 1st class upon the further payment of $20 any time within the next 10 days. After which, if I have not been made a member of the 1st class, my name should be dropped from the rolls." Renji Singh was the embodiment of courtesy when he bowed low and handed me my receipt. "My dear sir," he said, "I shall now be happy to explain to you anything that I can." "I would like," I said, "if possible, to see the original papyrus, which I understand were found with the elixir, and I also would like to learn more fully the details as to how and where this elixir was obtained." Renji Singh bowed, and going to the corner of the room, opened a small fireproof safe, taking from it a roll of what proved, after being unrolled, to be an ancient papyrus manuscript written in the Sanskrit language. As far as I could make out, it seemed to be the original, of which the printed circular was a translation. It certainly appeared ancient enough. "This manuscript," said Singh, "and the box of powder was obtained by my brother and given to me at his death. He died from the effects of a fall from his horse, which broke 3 ribs and otherwise injured him internally. He never would have died except from that accident, as he had taken several doses of the elixir. Just how long it will enable a man to live we do not know, but certainly 150 years, and perhaps even 200 years. He obtained it in the following manner. My brother had long been desirous of visiting Lhasa, which is, as you know, the wonderful capital of Thibet, but was unable to do so until a few years before his death, when he accompanied a Hindu who went there for the purpose of making certain reports to a foreign government. His name I am not at liberty to disclose, but his report was simply signed Punjab A.B. My dear brother described Lhasa to me very minutely, and from all accounts it must be the most wonderful city in the world. As you probably know, no European or Christian has ever been allowed to enter within its walls. According to my brother's description, the city is situated in a fertile plain on the Sampo River, some 600 miles north of Calcutta, and has a population of fully 60,000 persons. The streets are wide, and the houses have their walls whitened, and the frames of the doors and windows colored red and yellow. Nearly west of the city, connected with it by a splendid avenue, is the mountain of Buddha, where now stands the temple of the Grand Lama. This temple is 4 stories high, and therein dwells the Grand Lama and his high priests. Some idea of the magnificence of this temple may be obtained when I tell you that its great pillars are covered with plates of pure gold. The Grand Lama can live forever, and many people believe he does so, but he really does not. After a certain time he reincarnates himself into a new body. All of the priests, however, are very old. It is claimed that Pandita is at least 150 years old. The Grand Lama has about him 2 priests of the highest grades, one the Pandita and the other Choji. The Grand Lama sits upon an altar or throne for hours at a time, clothed in gold woven cloth and jewels of fabulous value. Over his head is a magnificent peacock's tail, composed entirely of gold and precious stones. It is the custom of the Grand Lama to receive persons who desire to receive his blessing at certain hours of the day. For a small amount of money, one is allowed to bow before him. For a little more money, one may touch his garment and receive his silent blessing. But for the sum of 20 rupees, he will speak to the person and touch him with a little wand. The Punjab A.B., in describing his interview, states that the Grand Lama talks in a hoarse voice, which he tries to make as much as possible like God's. It was during his visit to the temple that my brother learned of the wonderful treasures preserved there. Fabulous stories being told about a huge emerald with an ancient inscription engraved upon it, the mystic seal of the first Lama, which had been handed down for ages, together with the greatest treasure of them all, known as the elixir of life. This wonderful powder was and is used by the high priests, some of whom are of great age. It is supposed to have been brought into Tibet by King Shrumb Tsan during the 7th century, and that it originally came from Nepal. "How did your brother procure it?" I asked. "By bribing one of the priests. My brother was wealthy, and being very desirous of procuring some of this wonderful powder, he tried to buy some of it. Under no circumstances, however, would they listen to him or even allow him to see it. He succeeded, however, as I said, in bribing one of the priests, paying him a large sum of money, several hundred rupees, I believe, and was shown the sacred chests containing this powder, and other treasures, including precious manuscripts and some jewels of great value. The powder was contained in 5 little gold boxes of beautiful workmanship. While examining them, they heard a door close and the sound of footsteps in the passageway. The priest became very much frightened and begged my brother to replace the boxes and manuscript at once, and was so agitated that he did not notice my brother when he slipped one of the gold boxes into his pocket. The person, whoever he was, passed on down the passageway, and as soon as they dared, they hurriedly left the vault. Luckily for my brother, he left Lhasa with Punjab that evening, and never learned whether the theft was discovered or not. Probably his powder would have done him little good had it been so, and had he been suspected. "But how," I asked, "do you know that this elixir will really prolong life?" Singh smiled sweetly and said, "I myself, my dear sir, am a living proof of that. I am 110 years old, and today there are in New York some 60 men who will live to that age, having taken the powder, unless they die from some form of disease. This elixir will not protect them against poison or diseases where the poison germ has entered the system. That is impossible, but it acts upon the nerve centers and upon blood corpuscles in such wonderful ways that there is no degeneration. The person simply lives along the same as he would between the ages of 30 and 40. He's always the same. He may die from many causes, but it will not be from old age." "My friend," I said, "took the liberty to analyze some of this powder." "Ah, and may I inquire the result of his analysis?" A peculiar yellow light came into those eyes, and although he smiled, Have you ever seen a caged tiger languidly looking at the crowd of people in front of his cage, and suddenly discover a dog near him? I don't know that I have, said Robinson. Well, if you do, you'll notice the same yellow light flash into his eyes, and the sudden change of expression that I saw in the eyes of our friend Sing. It was gone in a moment, however, and he was again smiling sweetly. I understand he found it to consist principally of common salt. Quite so, answered Sing, but he must have discovered that it also contained something else. That is true, I answered. There was a small amount of vegetable matter which gave it a yellow color. That is the true elixir, said Sing. Salt is merely necessary for the results. You, as a scientific man, know that the poison which kills so quickly from the fang of a cobra and the ordinary white of an egg can hardly be distinguished by the chemist. He finds them both to be albumin. Why, then, should one kill and the other be harmless? I asked. Simply the minute something else which is contained in the snake poison and which is held in solution by the albumin. Have you any other proof of the power of this elixir? I inquired. My dear sir, I trust you do not question the truth of my statement regarding my own age. He frowned slightly, and those wonderful eyes of his glanced like lightning toward the two huge attendants standing in plain sight in the hallway. Not at all, I hastened to assure him. It all seems so wonderful to me. You must excuse my apparent incredulity. The most natural thing in the world, smiled Sing with grave courtesy. But I will let your own eyes banish any doubt you may have as to the wonderful properties of this strange powder. Ajmed, he called, ask my son to come here a moment, if he would be so good. The attendant who had spoken to me when I entered immediately disappeared, and in a moment a back door opened, and the bent figure of a very old man entered the room and spoke to Sing in a weak voice. The language was evidently Hindustani, but I caught a word here and there which sounded familiar. Sing spoke to him sharply, and turning to me said, "This is my son. He is nearly 80 years old, but refuses to take the powder on account of his religious principles. He belongs to the sect which believes that to die is better than to live, that his spirit will become incarnate in another body, and in his next life he will be at least a Kopchi." My eyes must have betrayed my incredulity. "You do not doubt that he is my son?" sweetly asked Mr. Sing. "Certainly not," I answered. "I trust, then, that I shall have the pleasure of furnishing you with some of the wonderful powder. There is not very much left, but luckily it requires a very small dose. I have enough probably to supply 100 men to ensure them existence for 150 years. When that is gone, the supply can never be replenished." He sighed. "Thank you," I answered. "I shall think the matter over, and in all probability give myself the pleasure of calling upon you again." And then I came away, being bowed out by the sable attendants with all ceremony possible. There, what do you think of that? "Do you intend to return and purchase the powder?" asked Robinson. "Perhaps," answered Watson, "but I think I'll wait a while and see if Jones lives to be 150. End of section 12. Section 13 of Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales. Now, this is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales by Charles B. Cory. The Voodoo Idol. Jones lay on the sofa, watching the consul mix a long cool drink of Apollinaris water and crushed soursop. His arm pained him a good deal, and the bandages felt hot and uncomfortable. By his side was a little table on which were piled numerous articles in a manner common to mankind, among which were a bottle of whisky, a revolver, several books, and a plate containing some bananas and sapodillias. A light breeze stirred the curtains behind him, and under the awning he could see the long stretch of green palms and waving coconuts back of the city. A faint white line indicated the road to Le Coupe. "I tell you what, old man," said the consul, as he poured the mixture from the shaker into the tall, thin glasses, "you are all mighty lucky to get out alive, and you took big chances. Stealing a god of the voodoo priests is about as dangerous an experiment as playing with fire over a barrel of gunpowder. From your description I should judge the place you found it was about 15 miles back of Gantier." Jones nodded in silence. "Well," continued the consul, "it was somewhere in that vicinity. They killed that Frenchman last year, and how they ever let you get out alive I don't know. They meant to kill you fast enough. Tried to poison you at Gantier, and knocked out that servant of yours. You escaped by not drinking the coffee. Then someone shot at you on the road, and even then you didn't have sense enough to throw away the idol. But even if you had, I don't know that it would have made any difference. Then, the day before yesterday, they put a bullet through your arm at Le Coupe, and if old Chabot had not gone himself with you part of the way, I don't believe you would have ever reached here alive. What on earth made you monkey with that idol, anyway?" Jones explained that he could not resist the temptation to steal it. He'd been camping on the banks of a nearby dry stream, 10 miles or more east of Gantier, where he had found the little hummingbird, Melissuga minima, the smallest bird in the world, very abundant. He had also trapped a specimen of that extremely rare Solenodon, and being anxious to procure more, he had stayed there for several days. Within half a mile of his camp was a small stone tower, open at the sides, in the middle of which stood a little idol on a sort of pedestal. This little idol was about 18 inches high, and was carved out of stone, the eyes, oddly enough, being bone. Joan had cast longing glances on this idol, but didn't dare to touch it, or in fact to go into the tower, as the natives were sullen and suspicious, and on more than one occasion showed signs of being decidedly ugly. Jones saw enough to confirm his impression that these people were a bad lot, and so one dark night he folded his tent like the Arabs, and silently stole away, taking with him, as a souvenir, the little idol, which he had carefully rolled in a blanket and packed on one side of his pack-horse, to balance his box of specimens on the other. Fear of possible unpleasant consequences had caused Jones to ride fast, but he had been followed, and 3 separate attempts made on his life by unknown persons. The last one resulted in a bullet through the upper part of his left arm. He was safe enough now, however, as he remarked, there being little likelihood of danger while under the protection of the American consul in the city of Port-au-Prince. "Don't you be too sure of that," said the consul. "There, try that, and see how you like it." Jones sipped the cool mixture. It seemed like nectar to him in his feverish condition. The bullet which had passed through his arm had made a wound which, while not in itself serious, had left him weak and feverish. "Yes," continued the consul, "you were mighty lucky to get off as you did. You may not know it, but right here in Haiti the people in the interior are as savage and bloodthirsty as any Central African tribe. Most of the inhabitants are descendants of Negroes brought from the Gold Coast many years ago. They've reverted to their original wild state, keeping up many of the ancient customs. Mixing as they have with the Indians of the interior, the present race is even worse than their ancestors. From Toussaint L'Ouverture in 1804, when he first ruled, to Hippolyte Florville and Salomon, the island has been the scene of continuous insurrection, intrigue, and murder. Salomon was probably the best of them all. He was an immense Negro, some 6 feet 4 inches tall, with a pock-marked face, who had received an education in Paris and married a Frenchwoman. He, like the rest, however, was superstitious and cruel at heart. Hippolyte was a voodoo priest, and, it is said, an anthropophagist. The people of the interior have an intense hatred for the white man, and still retain many of the barbarous customs of the savages of the African interior. The voodoo dance is presided over by a high priest, who usually commands a goat or a hen to be killed, but in some of the more important ceremonies a child is murdered, and its blood mixed with the tafia and drunk by the dancers. The high priest is called Papaloi. Every 2 years after the dance of the moon a human sacrifice is ordered. Generally a young girl is killed and eaten. You probably ran up against one of the voodoo gods, and the large stone in front was undoubtedly the sacrificial stone. How you ever got away alive passes my comprehension. They evidently thought you would try to leave in the daytime, and had things all arranged for taking a shot at you somewhere. But your nocturnal skedaddle knocked their plans galley west. There's one thing dead sure, though. Those voodoo priests are bad medicine, as we used to say out west, and you want to keep your weather eye open until you're safe on board a steamer and out of the harbor. I wouldn't give 5 cents for your life if you walked about the streets of Port-au-Prince. When the time comes to leave, I'll have you smuggled on board. The authorities would wink at your assassination, but they would not openly countenance it. Jones remarked wearily that he had begun to believe it might be as well for him to rest quietly in the consulate, and not give them another chance. The soft, flower-scented breeze blew softly in through the open window and was soothing to Jones. Lying there on the lounge with his eyes closed, he soon fell asleep, and the consul left him to attend to his various duties. When Jones awoke, he lay in a sort of drowsy condition, half asleep and half awake. Through his partly open eyes he looked through the open door leading out on the broad piazza. There was a chair in front of the door, and over the top of this he saw a face and a pair of very black eyes looking at him intently. For a moment he imagined it was some freak of his imagination, as the face was as still as though it was carved in wax. Right in line with Jones' eyes, and within a foot of his half-extended arm, was the little table, and the handle of the revolver seemed to stand out as though placed there for his especial benefit. That was certainly real, and it required a very slight movement for his fingers to close over the pistol handle. But he did not move, and lay watching the figure, which began to rise slowly and developed into the form of a large, ugly-looking negro. Jones remembered particularly noticing a white scar across the cheek, just under the eye. The man was not looking at him now, but was glancing about with the stealthy look of a hunted animal. At the same time he drew from under his coat a long, unpleasant-looking knife. As he did so, Jones lifted his pistol, and, aiming hurriedly at the breast, fired. The man dropped, grasping at the chair as he did so, but immediately rose to his feet, swaying unsteadily. Bang went Jones' pistol again. This time the negro did not fall, but stood seeming half-dazed, steadying himself by holding on to the back of the chair. Jones fired again, and at the report the man clapped his left hand tightly over his heart, and with a muttered imprecation threw the knife at Jones, just as he fired his 4th shot. The thud of the knife driving deep into the wood close to Jones's head, being followed by the sound of a falling body on the hard floor. As the consul ran into the room, followed by one of his men, he found Jones sitting on the lounge, pale and weak from excitement and fever. "Lucky you had the pistol," remarked the consul. "Might have been unpleasant. See that gummy green stuff on the knife? Well, that's poison, and a mighty bad poison, too. One little scratch. But all's well that ends well. The steamer is in, and if I were you, I would make a bee-line for the pier and get on board just as soon as the Lord will let you." Jones rose with some difficulty and went out upon the wide balcony. On the blue waters of the bay he saw a large steamer, and at her stern, floating in the breeze, the most beautiful flag in the world, the Stars and Stripes. The effect on him, in his half-hysterical condition, was to make him want to cry and cheer at the same time. The room he had just left was dark in contrast to the bright sunshine outside, but he could see the knife and the dead body of the negro, from which a narrow dark red streak was slowly making its way across the floor. "We can't go any too quick to suit me," said Jones. End of section 13. Section 14 of Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales by Charles B. Cory. An Arizona episode. Wendell Harrison was a club man with no ambition in life beyond making his small income pay his club fees, and leave enough for him to live in the manner peculiar to young men of his class. His one hope in life, as he often told his particular crony, was to find a rich wife, and it seemed to Harrison that chance had played into his hands when he received an invitation from old John Stuyvesant to join his party on a trip to the Grand Canyon in northern Arizona. Harrison had met old Stuyvesant on the yacht of a mutual friend a few weeks before, and knowing how to make himself agreeable, he had done so to the best of his ability, with the result that he had been asked to make one of a party on this western trip in Mr. Stuyvesant's private car. "Good luck to you, old man," said his chum as he was leaving the club on his way to the station. "Go in and win." "Trust me for that," answered Harrison. The trip out proved a delightful one. Miss Nellie Stuyvesant, the young lady who Harrison had decided was the most likely catch, did not prove as easy as he imagined. While charming and agreeable, she had evidently seen more or less of the world, and was not to be gathered in by the first man who made up his mind he would like to have her ornament his home. Likewise, she was a girl with common sense, and knowing her position and advantages, did not lose her head when a man showed an inclination for her society. In fact, just before the party arrived in Flagstaff, she had made it very evident she did not care for serious attentions from anyone. She was, however, of a decidedly romantic nature, and Harrison pondered deep and long as to the best method of gaining her affections. Late that evening he was reading a sensational novel, when suddenly he laid it down, and a faraway look came into his eyes. "By Jove," he muttered, "the very thing! On this very road, too! Whether the story is true or not, it's reasonable enough, although a trifle dramatic. But that's what's wanted to attract a girl like Nell. She don't care for me, and never will, and all she wants is excitement and novelty. But if she thinks I saved her life, or risked my own in protecting her, there might be a chance." In this story the chap had led rather a tough life, but had reformed, and the road agents recognized him and knew he meant business. He got pretty well shot up, but the whole thing cast a halo around him which would undoubtedly attract any romantic girl. Damn it, why couldn't I do it? It's that or nothing. The trip will be over in 2 weeks, and it's pretty evident that I'm not in it unless something extraordinary happens. The saloon was pretty well filled with a sprinkling of miners, Mexicans, and ranchers. Men in blue overalls, flannel shirts, and wide-brimmed hats were playing the different games of chance, or standing in groups in front of the bar. A harsh, brass-sounding piano on a raised platform at the end of the room was being played by a short-haired individual in a dress suit, and a young lady who evidently did not object to the calcimining process to aid nature was singing a topical song. In the corner stood Wendell Harrison, surrounded by 4 rough-looking men who seemed very much interested in what he was saying. "Now, I think you understand thoroughly what is required," said Harrison. "I am to pay you $5 each now, and $20 each when the job is done. Likewise, if it comes off successfully and the bluff works, I am to give you $20 more upon our return to Flagstaff. Don't forget to carry out the plan exactly as we have agreed. When I spring from the coach waving my pistol and firing blank cartridges, one of you is to shout, 'Fighting Harrison, by God!' and shoot 2 or 3 times as you run. The thing is easy, but requires a little judgment. I don't care where you stop the stage. Stop at any old place, but not too near Flagstaff. I shall be alone in the coach with an old man and 2 young girls, so there is not the slightest danger, and I will see to it that the old man is unarmed." "Say, Jimmy, I must tell you something, but let me laugh first. Say, I nearly fell down in a fit. I'm going to tell you all about it, but don't call me a liar, or I'll kill you. What do you think? Oh, Lord, how my stomach aches. What do you think? Wait a minute. I'll tell you in a minute. Let me laugh it out now, or I'll drop down right here. Say, I sat in that booth over there having a quiet drink, and what do you think? A dude in the next booth commenced putting up a job with 4 ducks. One of them is Mexican John. The other is Brady, our assistant barkeeper here. And as far as I can make it out, Brady got the 3 other ducks. Say, wait a minute. I don't believe I ever will stop laughing. What do you think? This dude is going up to the canyon on my next trip, and is going to have these 4 fellas stop the stage to put up a bluff on his girl to show what a fighter he is. And he's going to give them $20 each. He's going to jump out and pull his gun and clean out the crowd and then go back and bask in the sunshine and admiration of the young girls. Oh, Lord, that skunk don't care how much he scares the girls and the old man who are going along, but all he wants is to pose as a fighter from way back. But say, Jimmy, what do you think? I've been thinking this thing over, and I don't believe his little picnic will transpire. He calculates to blow in $80 to make a monkey of himself, and I'm a-thinking that we can use that $80 in our business and teach that fella a good lesson all to once. What breaks me up more than anything is that he told Brady to hunt me up and to tell me on the quiet that there was a reformed desperado going with me who used to be known by the name of Fightin' Harrison. Worked me into that job, too. What do you think? The stage was slowly toiling up a dusty hill some 5 miles from Flagstaff. The road was rough and the day was warm. The stage driver let the horses take things easy, and from time to time shook with suppressed emotion. "I hope I may die," said he to himself, "if this ain't the damnedest." In the back seats the 2 young girls, the old man, and the would-be hero were enjoying the scenery and the novelty of the trip in spite of the dust. Suddenly 3 men sprang into the road, and a loud voice commanded the stage to hold up. "What is the matter?" asked Nellie excitedly. "Don't be afraid," said Wendell, pressing her hand. "Remember, I am with you." A rough-looking man appeared at the side of the stage. "Is your name Harrison?" he said, addressing Wendell. "It is," answered Harrison boldly. "What do you want?" "I have a bill here for $80 against you, which will have to be paid, or you'll have to get out and go back to town with me." "What do you mean?" gasped Harrison. "Just what I say, young man. Your name is Wendell Harrison, isn't it? You used to be known here by the name of Fighting Harrison, didn't you?" "Certainly not. You have the wrong party," answered Harrison indignantly. "Well, I don't know about that. Didn't somebody tell you that this fellow was Fighting Harrison, Bill?" "They certainly did," answered the stage driver. "It's all a mistake," said Harrison. "Mistake or not, you'll have to pay or go back to town with us. That's all there is to it. I believe you are the Harrison I want." "Oh, Mr. Harrison," said Nell, "do pay this man and let's go. You can easily recover the money when you get back to town." "Yes," said Mr. Stuyvesant, "that certainly is the best way to settle the matter. It is undoubtedly a case of mistaken identity. But this man is evidently acting in good faith, and you will have no difficulty in straightening matters upon your return at Flagstaff." Harrison's face was very red, and he looked and acted ugly, but this man evidently meant business, and there was no way out of it but to pay the money, which he did with a very bad grace, taking a receipt made out to Wendell Harrison, alias Fighting Harrison, of Arizona. "An exciting incident," said Nell, as the party rode away. "Yes," said Harrison, "but one that might just as well have been left out of the program." The stage moved on, but Harrison seemed uneasy. Every few minutes he mopped his face with his handkerchief and pressed his hand to his head as if in pain. Visions of the little reception committee some few miles ahead were constantly in his mind. What would he say and do when the stage was stopped and he received his cue to spring out and fire off his 6-shooter, especially as he had only $15 left in his pocket? What would these pseudo-gentlemen of the road do to him if, after his little exhibit of bravery, he failed to wind up the melodrama by settling with the actors. He didn't care to find out, and his mind was bent now in deciding the best way to get back to Flagstaff. He continued mopping his face, and once or twice he groaned. "What is the matter?" asked Mr. Stuyvesant. "Are you ill?" "I fear so," answered Harrison faintly. "I have a dull pain in my head, and I feel faint." "Oh, let us go back," said Nell. "It's only 5 miles, and we can start again tomorrow just as well." "Perhaps it would be as well," said Harrison weakly. "I fear I'm going to be ill." In the privacy of a room at the hotel, Harrison hastily manufactured an urgent telegram, calling him at once to San Francisco to see a sick uncle, and had barely time to explain matters and express his deep regret at being forced to leave the party at such short notice. An hour later he lay back in a luxurious chair in the smoking compartment of the California Limited, and gazed out of the window at the vast desert plains through which they passed. His eyes had a far-away look in them, and ever and anon he sighed. Far up the Grand Canyon road late that evening, Brady and his 3 companions still sat, watching sadly for the stage which came not. There they had sat in the burning sun without food or water since 10 o'clock that morning. They did not speak to each other, but occasionally they cursed, sometimes the birds, sometimes the inanimate things about them. At times they thought of Harrison, but what their thoughts were, no one will ever know. End of section 14. Section 15 of Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Montezuma's Castle and Other Weird Tales by Charles B. Cory. One Touch of Nature. "Pretty good cigar, this," remarked the cowboy. The Eastern man nodded. "Nowadays we can buy good ones out where I live, but 'twa'n't very long ago when good cigars were as rare out there as buffaloes are now round Kansas City. The enormous increase in population in some of your western cities is astonishing," remarked the Eastern man. The cowboy glanced at him with an amused smile. The Eastern man smiled back good-naturedly. "What's the joke?" he asked. "Oh, nothing," answered the cowboy. "Only I was thinking maybe you didn't live out west." "No, I'm a New Yorker," answered the Eastern man. "Well, I guess they raise pretty good men in both places," remarked the cowboy. "Our late war proved that, I think." The train had stopped, but there were no signs of a station, although 2 or 3 rather dilapidated houses and a typical western saloon could be seen a short distance ahead. "Wonder what we're stopping here for," remarked the cowboy. "It strikes me we've been here a pretty long time." Just then the porter passed the door of the smoking compartment, and the cowboy called to him. "Say, porter, what's the matter? Seems to me we've been stopping here a whole lot. What's the name of this metropolis?" "It's mighty lucky you've got whole necks," answered the porter. "The eccentric, or something about the engine, is broke, and we came mighty near having a bad accident. They sent in for another engine." "That's pleasant," remarked the Eastern man. "How long do you think we shall have to stay here before the other engine arrives?" "Give it up," said the porter. "Maybe an hour, maybe 2. Can't tell exactly. The train conductor will be along pretty soon, and he'll know all about it." "Guess I'll have to appoint myself a committee of 1 to investigate," remarked the cowboy. He arose and went out on the platform of the car, followed by the Eastern man. They climbed down and walked forward to where they saw a crowd gathered about the engine. The eccentric rod had broken short off, and had the engine not been slowing up at the time, the result might have been serious. The 2 men strolled down the track for a short distance, and the cowboy discovered a small colony of prairie dogs. Several of the comical little creatures were sitting on their hind legs on their mounds beside their holes, ready to disappear at the least sign of danger. Occasionally one would run from one hole to another a short distance away, usually diving out of sight, to reappear again a few moments when satisfied there was no immediate cause for alarm. The cowboy amused himself by listlessly throwing small stones at the little animals, and after a few moments of this he turned to the Eastern man and said, "Say, I'm going to take a little stroll over yonder toward that luxurious mansion and get a drink from the well. Want to go along?" "With pleasure," answered the Eastern man. The two strolled slowly toward the house, which was decidedly in need of repair. The fence surrounding it was broken down in many places. Weeds and grass filled the little yard, in which there were still evidences of some past attempts at ornamentation in the way of flower beds, and the whole place gave evidence of poverty and lack of care. On the porch was seated a girl, apparently between 12 and 14 years of age. She was hugging an immense shaggy dog and crying as if her heart would break. "What's the matter, sis?" sympathetically inquired the cowboy. "Oh, sir, Jake's going to kill my Rover." "What for?" The sobs subsided a little. The girl looked up, wiping her eyes on her torn apron. "Why, he bited Jake 'cause he tried to kiss me, and I didn't want him to, and they're going to come and kill him." "Who's going to come and kill him?" "The feller he bited Jake." "There, don't cry, little un. Seems to me the pup did the proper caper. What do you think, pardner?" "In my opinion," answered the Eastern man, "the dog's action was decidedly laudatory." "And you think, same as I do, the pup hadn't ought to be killed for doing it?" "Decidedly not." "Say, sis, ain't you got any friends to sort of stand off that feller as allows to do the killing?" "No, sir, nobody except father, and he drinks sometimes and don't care for Rover, and he says he don't want no trouble." "Ain't you got no one else?" "No, sir, nobody but Rover. Mother's dead, and I ain't got nobody but Rover. Oh, dear me!" The girl buried her face in the shaggy coat of her friend and sobbed. The cowboy sat down on the step beside her. The dog eyed him inquiringly, but evidently decided he was a friend, and wagged his tail slightly. "Don't cry, my girl. Brace up now. Perhaps they won't kill him after all." "Oh, yes, they will. Jake is over in the saloon now. I saw him go in. He'll do it sure. He hates Rover. May I speak to your lapdog?" "Will he tear me up much if I pat him?" inquired the cowboy. "I wouldn't fool with him, sir. Rover don't like strangers." The cowboy snapped his fingers at the dog and called to him. "Come here, Rover." The splendid animal walked solemnly to him and rested his head on his knee and looked up steadily into his face. "Don't seem to be too savage nor nothing. Pretty decent sort of dog." "Oh, he is, sir. He's just the sweetest, lovingest dog that ever lived. I had him when he warn't no bigger than a coon, and couldn't eat nothing but milk. And he loves me, don't you, Rover? And I love him, and he's all I got to love in the world, and they're going to kill him. Oh, Rover, Rover, what shall I do? What shall I do? Now, sis, tell us about the row. Did the dog begin the trouble?" "Oh, no, sir. Jake came along this morning, and I was sitting here playing with Rover, and Jake he grabbed me and tried to kiss me, and I put up a holler, and Rover bited him in the leg. Jake swore and wanted to kill him, but he didn't dare to, and he didn't have no gun, so he's going home to get his gun, and he'll be back pretty quick, and he's going to kill him." The girl had stopped crying, but little hysterical sobs choked her from time to time as she talked. The cowboy pulled the dog's ears gently, and the animal responded by licking his hand. "Seems to me, pardner, that Jake ain't acting quite white in this deal." "It's an outrage," warmly responded the Eastern man. "I see two fellers," continued the cowboy, gently stroking the dog's head, "coming round the corner of the house. Maybe we'd better ask 'em please not to hurt the dog." "I agree with you most decidedly." The girl caught sight of the men and uttered a cry of fear. Seizing Rover by the collar, she attempted to drag him inside the house, but the dog braced himself and growled savagely, facing the newcomers. "Say, pard," remarked the cowboy quietly, "suppose they are impolite?" "Well, can you fight?" "I can try." "Bully for you, pard. That's the stuff. Shake." The two men shook hands warmly. Jake and his companion were now very near, and as they came up Jake pulled a large revolver from its holster. "Now, girl, get away from that dog. I'm going to shoot him, and I don't want to hurt you." The girl turned white, but she placed herself in front of Rover, shielding him as much as she could with her slender body. "Hold on, my friend," interposed the cowboy. "You mustn't shoot that dog." "Who's going to stop me?" sneered Jake. "I am." "You are you? But I'm going to shoot him just the same. If you shoot that dog, I'll give you such a beating your own mother won't know you. Savvy?" "Won't, eh? Perhaps you notice I've got a gun," said Jake, with an evil look in his eye. "I've got one, too, but I ain't pulled it yet," answered the cowboy slowly. "See here now," interposed Jake's companion, "where do I come in? What'll I be doing all the time when you're smashing up my pard here?" "I will try and occupy your attention quietly," said the Eastern man. "The hell you will." "I will. Now, gentlemen," said the cowboy, "we don't want no trouble, but there's a peck of it all around here if you fellows try to hurt that dog. That dog bit you because you tried to kiss the girl, and he served you damn well right." "It's a lie," interrupted Jake sullenly. How it was done the Eastern man never knew, but Jake went staggering backward, and when he recovered himself he stood with the blood trickling from a cut under his eye, and the cowboy had him covered with a big Colt .45, and the eyes which looked at him over the barrel were ugly enough to make a gamer man than Jake feel uneasy. "Drop your gun." Jake dropped it. "Now move away from it." Jake did so. The cowboy handed his big pistol to the Eastern man and walked straight up to Jake, who looked decidedly uncomfortable. "Now take it back or I'll smash your face," said the cowboy savagely. "All right, but damn you, if it weren't my leg is sore where the dog bit me, I'd fight you till you couldn't see." The cowboy smiled grimly. "Good enough. Now get out of here." "Wait a minute," interposed the Eastern man. "May I make a suggestion?" "Cert, pard, why sure," answered the cowboy. "Well, it seems to me this matter had better be settled amicably, if possible. If not, after we're gone, something might happen to the dog. After what has happened, the gentleman naturally feels an animosity toward the animal. Now, I would suggest that he name a sum of money which he would consider sufficient to compensate him for injuries received. I would be glad to pay a reasonable amount, say $10, in settlement of all damages, if the gentleman will agree not to attempt to injure the dog in any way." "I'll agree to that," cried Jake eagerly. "Very well, here is the money." The Eastern man held out a $10 gold piece, which was seized upon by Jake, and without a word he and his companion started in a straight line for the saloon. The cowboy shouted after them, "Remember, I'll be back here next week, and if that dog isn't all right, there'll be trouble." And then turning to the girl he said, "Well, sis, the show's over. The dog's all right, so I guess I'll get aboard the train. So long. Please tell me your name, sir, and you too, sir," turning to the Eastern man. "Why, sis, why do you want to know my name for?" "To pray for you, sir. Mother's dead, but I pray every night just the same, and I ask God to bless Rover. He's all I've got now, you know. Is that wrong, sir? And tonight and every night I'm going to ask God to bless both of you for being so kind to Rover and me." "Oh, that's all right, sis. Don't think of it." The cowboy's voice was husky. "Goodbye. Goodbye, Rover, old boy." He seized the big dog in his arms and turned him over on his back, holding him down. The dog caught one of the man's hands in his huge mouth and chewed it gently, while the cowboy poked him playfully in the ribs with the other. Then the man jumped up and ran for the car, with Rover leaping and romping about him, uttering great deep barks of joy. The Eastern man followed more slowly. A cinder or something had got into his eye, and he was ostentatiously wiping it out with the corner of his handkerchief. That night, in the darkness of her room, the girl knelt by the side of the rough bed and whispered softly her little prayer. "God bless Mama, God bless Papa, God bless Rover, and bless the two fellers that was good to me and Rover. I don't know their names, God, but you do." The sounds of a slight figure getting into bed were followed by, "'Scuse me, Rover, didn't mean to step on your foot. Good night, Rover, dear." Several heavy blows by a tail on the floor answered her, and then for a time there was silence. The wind moaned faintly in the chimney, and a rat squeaked and scampered across the floor, and then a board creaked. The child slept on, oblivious to it all, but at each new sound the dark form on the floor stirred slightly, a shaggy head was raised, and wide-open, faithful eyes gazed in the direction from whence it came, intent, alert, and watchful. End of section 15.
Thanks for visiting Timeless Audiobooks. Please remember to like, comment, share and subscribe for our latest audiobook uploads.